Chapter 6. Before the duel. Fu Hongxue, about 36-37 years old, characterized by his maimed right foot and the saber that never left his hand. His martial arts don't seem to be from a particular school or teacher. His self-learned saber is extremely quick and widely acknowledged as the martial world's #1 saber. His family background is unclear. He was said to be adopted from birth by the Devil Sect's Princess Bai Feng, and thus well he is acquainted in all kinds of killing arts using poison. He had never married, and roamed the world without a home. His character is eccentric and callous, operating alone and associating with no one else. Duel slowly pushed the paper with these data to the thumb without any expressions. Thumb asked, "Have you read these?" Duel. Thumb sighed, "I know that you would not be satisfied, but that's all the data we could dig out, and that's as much as anyone know about Fu Hongxue." Duel. "Very good." Thumb blinked and lightly probed, "Are these of any help to you?" Duel. "Not at all." Thumb. "Not even one bit?" Duel slowly nodded. He stood up, opened up a step and quickly sat down again. He said coldly, "Your data left out two things, the two most important points." Thumb. "Oh." Duel. "He was cheated by a woman before, very badly cheated." Thumb. "Who was this woman?" Duel. "A hawk called Queenon." Thumb sighed again. "I had always wondered why intelligent men are so easily cheated by whores." Peacock suddenly butted in and sneered, "That's because intelligent men would only like intelligent women and clever women are mostly whores." Thumb shook his head and laughed. "I knew you hate women but would never guess that you hated them that much." Duel sneered, "Looks like he was also cheated by a woman." Peacock's face changed color, unexpectedly smiled and changed the topic. "What's the second point?" Duel. "He has a sickness." Thumb. "What sickness?" Duel. "Epilepsy." Thumb's eyes shone. "When his sickness acts up, he would foam in the mouth and roll on the ground." Duel. "Epilepsy has only one kind of effect." Thumb wondered, how could an insane cripple like him mastered the unparalleled saber under the heavens? Duel. "He has worked hard." It was said that he practiced his saber at least 8 hours every day, starting from the age 4 to 5, drawing his saber at least 12,000 times a day. Thumb laughed bitterly, "I can't believe that you know more about him than us." Duel softly said, "I know that much about each and every person in the Hall of Fame, because I had spent 5 whole months collecting their info and another 5 months researching their skills." Thumb. "I am sure you had spent more time on Fu Hongxue than anyone else." Duel acknowledged that. Thumb. "So what's the result of your research?" Duel. "His saber had never left his hands. For at least the last 20 years that saber is all he ever used. By now, that saber had practically become part of his body. He used that saber better and more easily than others used their own finger." Thumb. "From what I know, that saber isn't really a good quality saber." Duel. "A saber that can kill is a good saber." For Fu Hongxue, that saber is no longer just a saber. The man and saber had developed a link that others would not be able to understand. Although Duel did not say that aloud, but Thumb had understood what he had meant. Peacock was pondering all this time, and suddenly said, "If we can take away his saber a broken bar." Duel. "Nobody can take away his saber." Peacock smiled, "There are always exceptions to every matter." Duel. "There will be no exceptions in this case." Peacock did not argue further but instead asked, "Usually, when would his sickness act up?" Duel. "His sickness surfaces when he is suffering from extreme anger or sorrow." Peacock. "If you can strike when he is sick a broken bar." Duel's face darkened and coldly said, "What kind of person do you think I am?" Peacock smiled again, "I also know you are not willing to do such things, but we could easily have others to do that. If we could get someone to anger him first, then a broken bar." Duel suddenly shot up, and coldly declared, "I only hope you understand one thing." Peacock is listening, and so is the thumb. Duel. "This duel is between he and I alone, no matter who wins or loses. It has nothing to do with anyone else." Thumb suddenly injected, "Nothing to do with Hongxue as well?" Duel's hand on the scabbard tightened suddenly. Thumb. "If you haven't forgotten Hongxue, then you should at least do one thing." Duel could not help but to ask, "What is that?" Thumb. "Let him wait. Let him wait longer, till he is anxious and bothered before you go." He smiled and continued, "This battle you win or lose, live or die, We don't really care. But we are also not keen to collect your body. A broken bar. Noon. The abandoned family garden. The sun's rays are shining on the hexagonal pavilion. Outside the pavilion, there is one man, one saber. A pitch-black saber. Fu Hongxue slowly walked across the weeds-invaded alley, his hand clenching the saber tightly. Although the red paint on the railings were already peeling off, the pavilion was still standing proud in the midst of the greenery. Under the sun's rays, it looked every bit of its former glory. This place certainly used to be splendid. But why had it fallen to such a desolate state? A pair of swallows flew in and settled on the poplar tree outside the hexagonal pavilion, as though they were searching too for its former glory. It's a pity that while the poplar tree was still the same, the local scenery was all gone. The swallows had flew back and fro. How many times had they came and how many times had they left? The poplar never asked. The poplar had no words. The poplar had no feelings. Fu Hongxue suddenly felt a stinging pain in his heart. He had long mastered the polar's silence, but when could he ever mastered the polar's ruthlessness? Fu Hongxue stood there foolishly, as if forgetting where he was and where he is from. He did not think further, because he suddenly heard somebody's laughter. Laughter, clear and sweet like a golden aureole. The sun had set and the grass had grown tall, but there was no sign of the aureole. The sounds of the golden aureole was in the tall grass. From the tall grass, a girl suddenly stood up, looking at Fu Hongxue and laughing in a silly way. Her laughter was beautiful, but more so was her person. Her long raven hair as soft as silk. She didn't comb her hair and let her silky soft black hair fall free on her shoulders. She didn't wear any makeup either, just a long gown that fitted easily on her. It is neither silk or satin, but it lusted like her hair. Fu Hongxue did not ask. "I was laughing at you." She laughed even more sweetly. "You stood there, looking like a fool." Fu Hongxue was silent. "You wouldn't even ask who I am?" "Who are you?" Fu Hongxue had asked, as he had originally intended to. Who could have known that the moment he opened his mouth, that long-haired girl leapt up with a yell. "I was waiting for you to ask just that." She leapt up with the ominousness of a provoked kitten. "Do you know who owns the land you are standing on? Who are you to swagger around like a lord?" Fu Hongxue coolly watched her and waited for her to continue. "This place belongs to the Ni family." Her finger pointing at her own nose. "I am second Miss Ni. I could chase you out any time I pleased." Fu Hongxue could only keep his mouth shut. One hadn't much to say when one was caught trespassing by the owner herself. Second Miss Ni stared at him maliciously with her pair of large eyes. She smiled again, still as sweetly as before. "However, I certainly would not chase you out, because he broken bar." She winked. "Because I like you." Fu Hongxue could only listen. "You can choose not to fancy someone, but you can't prevent others from fancying you." But just as suddenly, this second Miss Nit changed her mind. "I was actually lying when I said I like you." Sighing, "I didn't chase you out, because I know I am not your match." Fu Hongxue could not help but to ask, "So, you know me?" "Of course." "What do you know?" "I not only know about your martial arts, but your surname and name as well." With her hands behind her back, she swaggered out of the long grass. Slanting her eyes, she sized up Fu Hongxue from top to bottom. "Others all said that you are a freak, but I don't find you strange in any way. In fact, you are rather good-looking." Fu Hongxue slowly turned and walked towards the hexagonal pavilion. "You are the only one left in this place? So what if I am alone?" She rolled her eyeballs. "Don't tell me you still dare to bully me. Usually, you don't stay here." "Why would I stay in such an ghastly place by myself?" Fu Hongxue suddenly turned and stared at her. "Why are you still here now?" Second Miss Ni exclaimed. "This is my home. I can come and go as I like. Why should I be under the orders of others?" Fu Hongxue could only shut up yet again. Second Miss Ni stared at him intensely in a fierce-looking manner. She then smiled again. "Actually, I shouldn't have quarreled with you. If we start fighting now, how could we manage in the future?" "Future? Do you know that there are some people without a future?" Fu Hongxue slowly stepped onto the stone dike and stared into an unseen distant location. Despite the sun's rays, his face is still frightfully pale. He only wished that Duel would be here soon. She however still latched onto him. "I know you are Fu Hongxue, so you should at least ask for my name." He did not ask, so she could only continue herself. My name is Hongxue, meaning a wise. Without warning, she leapt up the railings, facing Fu Hongxue. My father gave me this name, because I have been intelligent since childhood. Fu Hongxue ignored her. You don't believe me? With her hands on her waist, her forehead nearly touching his nose, she said, I not only know why you are here but also what type of people you are waiting for. You are certainly here for a life and death duel. I can tell from one look. You have a murderous aura. What did this small slip of a girl know about murderous auras? I also know that the person you are waiting for is certainly dual, Hongxue said confidently. Because within a few hundred li of this area, the only one who can match up with Fu Hongxue is dual. This girl indeed knew quite a bit. Fu Hongxue looked her 2 lively eyes and coldly said, since you know, you should leave quickly. Although his voice was cold, the emotion in his eyes wasn't quite as cold. In fact, the outline of his eyes showed some hint of tenderness. Hongxue smiled again, gently. Are you starting to care for me? Fu Hongxue immediately lowered his face. The reason I want you to go is that I don't kill for others to watch. Hongxue curled her lips. Even if you want me gone, there is no real hurry. Duel wouldn't be here that soon. Fu Hongxue lifted his head. The sun was already in the middle of the sky. Hongxue, he would let you wait. Let you till wait you are agitated. When you are agitated, his chances would increase. She smiled and continued, this is also a kind of battle strategy. A man like you should have thought of it a long time ago. She shook her head. No, you wouldn't have thought of it. You are a gentleman. I am, however, not one. So I can teach you a method that is used especially to deal with such villain. What method? Fu Hongxue did not ask but did not refuse either. Hongxue, he let you wait. You could also let him wait. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is an ancient method. An ancient method is usually a very effective method. Hongxue, we could take a walk before coming back. We could even play 2 games of chess, drink 2 cups of wine. Let him wait for you here. Let him wait till he is anxious. Fu Hongxue showed no reaction. Hongxue, I could bring you to my family wine cellar. If we are lucky, we might even find a couple jars of maiden's blush wine that was left when my aunt got married. She was in high spirits. But he still did not show any reaction, so she reached out for his hand, the hand that held the saber. Nobody can touch that hand. Her soft, delicate fingers merely brushed his hand, but she could feel a strange and powerful vibration. This powerful vibration actually sent her whole body flying away. She was trying to remain standing but she couldn't steady herself and finally she fell down, a heavy fall. Although she didn't cry, her eyes were already flushing red. With a choking voice, I only wanted to make friends with you and help you with such a small matter. Why did you treat me like this? She rubbed her nose and looked to cry any moment. She looked just like a small, tiny girl, so pitiful and cute. Fu Hongxue did not pay her any attention, did not look at her, not even one look. He however coolly said, get up, there are snakes in the grass. Hongxue felt even more wronged. How could I stand up when all bones in my body were nearly broken just now? She used the hand that was rubbing her nose to rub her eyes. I might as well be bitten to death by the venomous snake. Fu Hongxue's pale face still had no emotion, but he already started to walk to her. He knew how much power he had used just now. That strength did not come wholly from his hand. His hand was holding the saber and the saber too had its own strength. In his hands, the saber seemed to have a life of its own. With life, it has strength. The power of life. This kind of strength is powerful. Almost as powerful as that kind of sword chi that can cut through everything. He indeed shouldn't have used this sort of strength on her. Hongxue sat dejectedly upon the grass, with her face buried in her hands. Her hands are wide and small. Fu Hongxue couldn't help but to reach out and pull her up naturally with the hand which is not holding his saber. She did not refuse or avoid him. Her hand was soft and warm. Fu Hongxue had not touched a girl's hand for a long time. His control over his own lust is almost thorough and complete. However, he is still a man, one who wasn't too old yet. She obediently stood up, softly groaning. He was just about to support her, but her whole body unexpectedly fell into his embrace. Her body was so warm, so soft. He could feel his own heart beat, and she of course could feel it too. Oddly, At the same time he suddenly had another very unnatural sensation. He suddenly felt a rush of a murderous aura. At this very moment, she had pulled out a dagger, a 7-inch dagger. The dagger stabbed at the weak point on his armpit. Her face was still that of a small, tiny girl, but her hands were as deadly as the venomous cobra. Sadly, her stab still missed the mark. Fu Hongxue's body suddenly contracted, and the blade that was clearly aimed for his flesh and blood merely grazed his skin. In the same moment when she realized that she had missed, she had already sprung up. Just like the kind of venomous snake which could suddenly sprung up from the ground, the second she sprung up, she somersaulted away. One somersault after another in midair, resulting in her feet being on the eaves of the hexagonal pavilion. With her feet firmly planted, she sent herself flying 50 feet away into the trees with another flip. She had intended to flee further, but Fu Hongxue didn't give chase, so she didn't have to flee either. Amazingly, with just one foot on a thin tree branch, she could hurl abuse. Her lightness skill was high, but her ability to hurl abuse was higher. Now I know why that woman in the past jilted you. It is because you are simply not a man. You are not only crippled in the leg, but crippled in the heart as well. Her curses were not very vulgar, but every word was like a needle, piercing Fu Hongxue's heart. Fu Hongxue's pale face suddenly had a kind of red blush. His hand was already holding tight. He almost couldn't help but to draw his saber. However, he didn't move because he realized the pain in his heart wasn't as intense as he had thought. In the past, his pain was like a hot brand on livestocks, forever clear and fresh. Her every smile, her every tear, every bit of emotion, every little lie was deeply etched in his heart. He had always hidden it very well. All until the moment he saw Minayuxin, all the deeply hidden painful memories all came alive in front of him. No one could have imagined the pain he had borne then. But unexpectedly to him, after that shocking hurt, his pain lessened. The unthinkable pain had become more bearable. The hurt of the heart is sometimes like a festering wound. If you do not cut it out, it would rot even more. If you steeled your heart and cut it out, allowing the blood and pus to flow out, the wound might begin to heal. When Fu Hongxue lifted his head again, he had completely recovered his composure. Hongxue was still on the tree branch, staring at him in surprise. He didn't draw his saber, but he softly said 2 words, "You leave." This time Hongxue obeyed. She left very quickly. A broken bar. The sun had already moved to the west, and the hexagonal pavilion was already casting a shadow. Fu Hongxue had not moved. Not even his posture had changed. The shadows grew longer and longer. Fu Hongxue still did not move. When the body is calm, the heart is also calm. To a man who had long since grown accustomed to solitary and loneliness, waiting was no longer a painful thing. To draw his saber for the very first time, he had waited for 17 years. However, that draw of his saber was both meaningless and unnecessary. He waited 17 years to kill a person, to avenge his parents. But when he drew his saber, he already discovered that he wasn't a descendant of that family, and had nothing to do with that affair. That was more than ironic. No matter how you looked at it, this kind of irony was too cruel and malicious. But he had accepted it, because he had no choice. He had, henceforth, learned to endure. If Duel could understand this point, perhaps he wouldn't make him wait. While you are making others wait, you are also waiting yourself. In this world, many matters were like a double-edged sword. When you are trying to hurt others, many a times you would end up hurting yourself the same way. Sometimes, you hurt yourself more than you hurt others. Fu Hongxue softly breathed out, feeling totally calm. The time was already 15 minutes past 2 p.m. A broken bar. This dark, gloomy house was at the end of a long, dark and gloomy street. The original owner was a sickly and stingy old man. It was said that only when his body started to smell was his corpse was discovered. Peacock didn't rent this house because he was stingy. He had the ability to live in the best inns, but he preferred it here. For him, the name Peacock was an irony. His personality was definitely unlike that of the proud, gorgeous showbird. It was more like that of the bat which never saw the light of the day. When Thumb entered, he was lying on that cold and hard wooden bed of his. The only window of the house was also nailed shut, so it was really not unlike a bat's cave. Thumb sat down and exhaled. He could never understand why Peacock liked to live in this place. Peacock did not even take a single look at him. Only when his breathing quieted down, did Peacock asked, "What about Duel, Thumb? He is still waiting." "Peacock, when we parted ways, it was exactly 2 p.m. He added, "How long is he prepared to let Fu Hongxue waited?" "Thumb, I already told him to wait till at least 4 p.m. before setting off." Peacock broke into an evil grin. Standing in that ghastly place and waiting for 4 hours is certainly no joke. Thumb however raised an eyebrow. "But I am worried about something." "Peacock, what is that?" "Thumb, although Fu Hongxue is waiting, Duel himself is also waiting. I only worried that he might it more unbearable than Fu Hongxue." Peacock softly said, "If he died under Fu Hongxue's saber, do you suffer any loss?" "Thumb, number." "Peacock, then, there is nothing to worry about." Thumb laughed and wiped off his sweat with his sleeves. "I have good news for you." Peacock listened on. "Thumb, Yan Nanfei is not only poisoned, but seriously as well." "Peacock, where did you get this piece of news?" "Thumb, bought it with 500 stals of silver." Peacock's eyes shined. News that is worth 500 stals is usually very reliable. "Thumb, so, now we can go and kill him anytime." "Peacock, let's go now." The time was exactly 15 minutes past 2 p.m. A broken bar. Noon had long passed, and the sun's rays were getting harsher and hotter. Spring had gradually tapered off, and the long summer season would arrive soon. Fu Hongxue disliked the summer. Summer belonged to the children. During the day, they would frolic about naked in the ponds, roll in the grass, pick strawberries, and catch butterflies. During the night, they would sit under the melon shed, eating sweet melons chilled with well water. They would listen to the adults tell tall tales and trade gossip. They would catch a bag of fireflies, putting them into gauze pouches and exchanging them with young ladies and girls for a few pieces of candy. The golden summer, the golden childhood, a time of everlasting joy and no pain. However, Fu Hongxue never had a summer that truly belonged to himself. In his memories, summers were full of sweat and blood. Hiding in the hot woods, drawing the saber under the hot desert sun, drawing the saber again and again, the never-ending draw. This simple action had already transformed into the most important part of his life. When is the next time he draw his saber? The saber itself is death. When the saber is drawn, death comes. When he draw his saber this time, who would die? Fu Hongxue lowered his head, gazing at the hand that held the saber. The hand is cold, the hand is pale, the saber pitch black. At this moment, he heard the footstep of Duel. The time was exactly 45 minutes past 2 p.m. Chapter 7. The Duel. There was a small door at the corner of the back garden. Fu Hongxue walked in from that door, and so did Duel. They didn't climb over the wall. The path was swallowed with weeds. The distance would be shorter if one cut across the grass. However, they rather walked on the winding path. They were walking very slowly, but once they started, they definitely would not stop. From certain angles, they looked to share many similarities. However, they were definitely not the same type of people. You can tell simply from their saber. Duel's saber was richly bejeweled and glittering. Fu Hongxue's saber was pitch black. But these two sabers did share one thing in common. The two sabers are both sabers, sabers that kill. Did these two men share something in common? The two men are both men, men that kill. It wasn't 4 p.m. yet, but it was already time to draw the saber. Once the saber was drawn, there would be death. If it was not yours, then it was mine. Duel's footsteps finally stopped, faced Fu Hongxue and also faced the peerless saber in his hands. He was determined to have this person killed under his saber, but deep in his heart, the person he respected most was also him. Fu Hongxue however seemed to be staring at the horizon. On the horizon a dark cloud had covered up the sun. The sun was gone, but the sun would forever not die. What about man? Duel finally opened his mouth. I am Duel. Fu Hongxue, I know. Duel, I am late. Fu Hongxue, I know. Duel, I purposely made you wait. let you wait till you were anxious. Only then would I have a chance to kill you. Fu Hongxue, I know. Duel suddenly laughed. Too bad I had forgotten one point. He laughed bitterly. While I was making you wait, I myself was waiting as well. Fu Hongxue, I know. Duel laughed coldly again. So, you know everything? Fu Hongxue, at least one more thing. Duel, let hear it. Fu Hongxue coldly, when I draw the saber, you die. Duel clenched his hand tightly and his pupils contracted. After a long while, he asked, you are confident? Fu Hongxue, yes. Duel, then, why have you not drawn your saber? It was just after 2:45 p.m. The dark clouds had just covered the sun, and the wind had just carried a little cold draft. This was the most appropriate time for killing. Minai was at the Bright Moon Mansion, while the Bright Moon was at the Bright Moon Lane. When Thumb and Peacock stepped into Bright Moon Lane, they felt a gust of a breeze. What a refreshing breeze. Thumb took a deep breath and smiled. Today's weather is great for killing, and now is also a great time for killing. Peacock, oh, Thumb, after killing now, we still could take an unhurried, relaxed bathe and then have a comfortable drink. Peacock, after that, find a woman to sleep with. Thumb laughed with slighted eyes. Sometimes, I even get 2 or 3. Peacock also laughed. You said before Minai is also a whore. Thumb, that's what she is. Peacock, then, would you like to get her tonight? Thumb, number. Peacock, why? Thumb didn't directly reply to the question but slowly said, there are many type of whores. Peacock, what type is she? Thumb, she happens to the type I dislike. Peacock asked again, why? Thumb sighed and bitterly said, because of all the women I had seen, she is the most formidable. If I were to shut my eyes, she would kill me. Peacock, what if you don't shut your eyes? Thumb sighed again, even if I don't shut my eyes, she still could kill me. Peacock, I know your martial arts is pretty good. Thumb, but there are at least 2 women who could kill me in this world. Peacock, she is one of them? Thumb sighed and nodded. Peacock, who is the other one? Thumb, second Miss Hongxue. As he finished this sentence, a pearl of laughter was heard. Crisp and clear, as lovely as silver bells. The lane had high walls on both sides, and on top of the high walls was some foliage. Spring was deep, as was the foliage. The laughter came from deep within the foliage. Bad Fatty, how did you know I am eavesdropping? I didn't know. Thumb quickly denied. Then why are you purposely flattering me? The laughter was beautiful, the girl was beautiful, and the lightness technique was even more beautiful. When she floated down from the top of the wall, it was like a cloud, like a petal. A peach blossom petal just blown loose by the spring breeze, a piece of cloud that just flew out of the sky. Thumb saw her shadow, but she herself had disappeared. When Thumb followed her shadow to the other side of foliage, where it disappeared, his eyes slitted to a smile again. That is second Miss Hongxue. Why did she come and go so suddenly? Peacock couldn't help to ask. Because she wanted us to know that she is better than Minai. Thumb's eyes were still centered at where her shadow disappeared, so that we could set our minds to ease and kill Yan Nanfei. There is one thing I don't understand. What is it? Why must we kill Yan Nanfei? Peacock probed. What kind of man is he? Why nobody in the martial world has ever heard of his background? That is something that you best not ask. Thumb's manner abruptly became very strict. If you want to ask, you better prepare one item. What do you want me to prepare? A coffin. Peacock did not ask again. When he lifted up his head, a piece of dark cloud had covered up the moonlight. When this piece of dark cloud covered up the moonlight, Minai was facing an embroidery of wild roses by the window. She was also embroidering wild roses, the wild roses of spring. Spring was old. The wild roses were also old. Yan Nanfei was lying on the bed, not moving an inch. His pale face was not unlike Fu Hongxue's. The wind was blowing lightly from the window. The wind was cold, cold as the cruel autumn. Suddenly, she heard their noises. Their footsteps were lighter than the wind. Their voices were colder than the wind. Tell Yan Nanfei to come down quickly. If he doesn't come down, we would go up. Minai exhaled. She knew Yan Nanfei would certainly not go down and they would certainly come up. That was because Yan Nanfei didn't want to kill them. It was them that wanted to kill Yan Nanfei. Hence, Yan Nanfei could lie down comfortably in bed, while they had to bring their weapon, make their way to the lane, knock on the door and hurriedly burst in. for fear of missing the chance to kill the murderer and the murdered. Who is the noble one, while who was the despicable one? A question that no one could answer. She again lowered her head to her embroidery. She did not hear footsteps, nor knockings on the door, but she knew that someone was already outside the door. Come in. She didn't even lift her head. The door is unlatched. You only need to push. Although the door would be opened with a gentle shove, nobody opened it. Since the two of you are here to kill, you don't really expect your victim himself to open the door in welcome, do you? Her voice was very gentle, but to Peacock and Thumb it was sharper than a needle. Today's weather was great for killing, and now was a great time for killing. They were initially in great spirits, but now, they were feeling a little unhappy because the supposed victim seemed to be far more relaxed than they were. They were standing outside the door like fools, their heartbeat already doubled. Alas, killing wasn't such a happy thing after all. Peacock looked at Thumb, Thumb looked at Peacock. Both of them were asking themselves, is Yan Nanfei really poisoned? Is there an ambush behind the door waiting for them? Actually, they both knew that all their questions would be answered by opening the door, but neither of them made a move. When you enter, keep your footsteps light. Minai Uxin's voice was even more gentle now. Mr. Yan is poisoned and is now sleeping soundly. Please do not disturb his rest. Thumb abruptly laughed. She is Yan Nanfei's friend. She knows we are here to kill Yan Nanfei, but it seems that she is worried that we don't dare to enter and kill him. What do you think she is up to? Peacock coldly said. That's because she is a woman. A woman by nature would betray a man any time. Thumb, not so. Peacock, then what do you think she is up to? Thumb, that is because she knew that the more that she acts in such a way, the more suspicious we would be and the more likely to back off. Peacock, you are speaking quite reasonably. You've always understood women better than me. Thumb, then what are you waiting for? Peacock, waiting for you to open the door. Thumb, the one killing is you. Peacock, the one opening is you. Thumb laughed again. You never take any risk, do you? Peacock, right. Thumb laughing. Being partners with a person like you is really enjoyable, because you would surely live longer than me. When I die, you could at least recover my body. Still smiling, he lightly tapped the door with his fingers. With just that, the door opened. Minai Uxin was still embroidering in front of the window, and Yan Nanfei was still lying on the bed like a dead man. Thumb breathed out, please enter. Peacock, you would not go in. Thumb, you kill people. I open doors. I've done my part. It is now your turn. Peacock stared at him for a long time, suddenly said, there is something that I had never told you. Thumb, Peacock coldly, I loathed you the moment I set my eyes on you, and on at least 3 occasions I had wanted to kill you. Thumb however was still smiling. Luckily for me, on this occasion the one you want to kill is not me, but Yan Nanfei. Peacock was silent. Thumb pushed the door again to open it up wider. This way, please. Inside, the room was very quiet and very dark. The moonlight outside the window was completely blocked out by dark clouds. The time is 4 p.m. Peacock finally entered the room. When he entered, his hands had gone under his sleeves with the peacock plume in his fingers. The ice-cold and glossy peacock plume is a hidden weapon without peer in the world. His heart was again filled with confidence. Minai Uxin lifted up her head, looked at him and laughed. So, you are the peacock. Peacock, peacocks aren't funny. Minai Uxin, but you don't look like peacock, really don't. Peacock, you also don't look like a whore. Minai Uxin laughed again. Peacock, being a whore isn't funny either. Minai Uxin, but there is something else which is funny. Peacock, what is that? Minai Uxin, you don't look like peacock, but a peacock. I don't look a whore but am a whore. A donkey looks very much like a horse but isn't a horse at all. She smiled. In this world, there are so many matters that are just like that. Peacock, what do you really trying to say? Minai Uxin, for example, the hidden weapon in your person clearly looks like the peacock plume, but it isn't the peacock plume. Peacock laughed loudly, a big laugh. A person would only laugh this hard if he had heard the most ridiculous and impossible joke. Minai Uxin, the truth is that in your heart, you had long suspected this, because you had felt that its power isn't as fearsome as it was said to be. That's why you did not dare to use it against Fu Hongxue. Peacock was still laughing, but his laughter was a little forced. Minai Uxin, it is a pity that although you had your suspicions, You couldn't verify them, and also did not dare to verify them. Peacock couldn't help but to ask, "Can you prove it?" "THxChemSci. I can prove it, and only I am the only one who can, because he broken bar." Peacock, "Because what?" "THxChemSci softly, the kind of peacock plume you have. I have a few of them remaining. I can give you a few any time you like." Peacock's face changed color. Outside the door, Thumb's face also changed color. "THxChemSci, I can give you another one right now. Here, take it." Incredibly, she really did reach into her sleeve and took out a glittering golden cylinder. Casually, she threw it at Peacock, just like when one bestowed a single copper coin to a beggar. Peacock reached out his hand and caught it. After a quick look, he looked someone who had been kicked in the stomach. "THxChemSci, why don't you check if this peacock plume is exactly the same as the one you have?" Peacock did not answer. He didn't need to answer. Anyone who could see his expressions could already guess the answer. Thumb already started to move stealthily backwards. Peacock suddenly turned back and stared at him. "Why didn't you strike out and kill me?" Thumb with a forced laugh, "We are partners, why should I kill you?" Peacock, "Because I want to kill you. All along I wanted to kill you, and now I have to kill you no matter what." Thumb, "But I don't want to kill you, because there is no need for me to strike with my own hands." He really laughed so hard that his eyes had turned into slits. "In the martial world, if there is just a single person who knows that you are not the real peacock, within 6 hours, you would be a dead peacock. Peacock, unfortunately, you've forgotten one thing." Thumb, Peacock, although this peacock plume is a fake, to kill you, it is more than enough." Thumb's smile hardened, and his body sprang up. Although his reaction was slow at all, but he was still a step too late. A ray of blinding light had already shot out of the golden cylinder in Peacock's hands. As magnificent as the setting sun, as beautiful as the rainbow, Thumb's ugly and fat body was instantly swallowed up by this ray of beautiful light, just like the ugly sand swallowed up by the beautiful tide. When this ray of light faded, his life was also gone. With a clap of thunder, raindrops started to fall from the dark clouds. At last THxChemSci breathed out and said, "You are certainly right. Although this peacock plume is fake, it still has the power to kill." Peacock had already turned and stared at her. "That's why I could also use it to kill you." THxChemSci, "I know that. If you would kill even Thumb to ensure his silence, you certainly would not spare me." Peacock, "After you died, nobody would know if this peacock plume is real or fake." THxChemSci, "It is true that apart from me, nobody else knows this secret." Peacock, "Duel would wait till 4 p.m. before showing up, so if I rush there after I kill you, it would be just right. Regardless of who is the victor of that duel, he would also die under my hands." THxChemSci, "Your plan is very thorough. Unfortunately, you have neglected one thing." Peacock shut up and waited for her to continue. THxChemSci, "You had neglected to ask me why I know that this peacock plume is fake." Peacock indeed asked immediately, "How do you know?" THxChemSci softly said, "The reason why I am the only one that know this secret is because the one making these fake peacock plumes is me." Peacock was stunned again. THxChemSci, "If I could make these kinds of peacock plume, and dared to give one to you so casually, naturally, I am confident that I can defeat it." Peacock's face had turned white. His hands were trembling. His ability to kill was perhaps not because he had the peacock plume, but because he had a heart filled with self-confidence and a steady pair of hands. Now these two things had been destroyed. THxChemSci, "The first peacock plume was also arranged by me for you to find. I had looked for a long time before I chose you to be my peacock, because in the martial world there are not many people who are better suited than you. Therefore I would not casually allow you to die." However, a broken bar. She stared at him. Eyes that were as gentle as the bright moon had suddenly turned as sharp as a blade. "If you want to continue to be my peacock, you should learn to be as obedient as a peacock. If you have any doubt, you can strike now." Peacock clenched both his hands tightly but still couldn't stop trembling. He looked at both his hands and suddenly bended over and began to vomit. A broken bar, a ring of thunder, raindrops fell from the dark clouds. "I have not drawn my saber because I am confident." Fu Hongxue's voice seemed very far away, far in the dark clouds. "When a person wants to kill, Very often it is not unlike begging for a favor. He becomes very despicable. Because he does not have the utmost confidence, he would become very anxious in great fear of missing a good opportunity. He very seldom talked so much. He spoke very slowly, as if fearing that Duel could not bear it. It was because he knew that every one of his words had pierced Duel's heart like a blade. Duel's entire body had stiffened up. Even his voice had become coarse. So you have the utmost confidence in yourself. That's why you are not anxious. Fu Hongxue nodded. Duel, when are you going to draw your saber? Fu Hongxue, when you draw yours. Duel, what if I don't draw mine? Fu Hongxue, you certainly will draw your saber. In fact, you are very anxious to draw it because you want to kill me, but not me who want to kill you. That's why the true moment you really die is not when I draw my saber, but when you draw yours. Green veins had already protruded out of Duel's saber-wielding hand. He had not drawn, but he himself knew that he had to draw sooner or later. The ice-cold raindrops pelted on his body, on his face. He was facing Fu Hongxue, facing the most peerless saber in the world. Suddenly his mind went back to his lowly childhood. Heavy rain pounded the mud. The mud had soiled the whole street. He ran barefooted in the mud, because someone was chasing behind. He had escaped from the escort office, where he had stolen an escort officer's new shoes. The shoes were too big for him and had fallen off before he made it halfway across the street. But the officer still would not spare him. After the officer caught him, he stripped him naked, tied him to a tree and lashed him with a cane. When he faced Fu Hongxue now, his heart suddenly had that feeling again, the pain of being lashed. An agonizing pain that was beyond words, an agonizing pain that he could never forget. The rain was getting heavier, and the soil on the ground had turned into mud. Without warning, he took off the pair of soft-soled shoes that cost him 18 taels of silver, and stood barefooted in the mud. Fu Hongxue seemed to have turned into the escort officer who lashed him with the cane, turned into a symbol of his agonizing pain. He roared madly and tore off his clothing. He stood stark naked in the rain and mud, howling madly. All these years of self-restraint and control had finally found a release. So, he drew his saber. The moment he drew his saber was the moment of his death. So, he died. Death was not only passion, but also pain. These two things were something that he had never able to attain at the same moment. But at the moment of death, he did. A broken bar. The rain stopped as abruptly as it came. The path was still caked with mud. Fu Hongxue walked slowly but steadily on the path, his hand clenched on his saber. The saber was back in the sheath. The blood on the saber was cleaned off. The saber was still pitch black. His pupils were also pitch black, deep and black, enough to conceal all the mercy and sorrow of his heart. A ray of sunlight had broke through the cover of dark clouds, no doubt the last light of the day. The sunlight shone on the high wall. Suddenly from behind the wall there was a peal of laughter. A laughter crisp and clear, and as lovely as silver bells, but carrying a strange ridicule. Nihue appeared under the sunlight, not exciting to watch at all. What was not exciting to watch? Fu Hongxue did not ask. His footsteps didn't even slow down. But wherever he went, Nihue followed. Your duel wasn't exciting to watch at all. I had came to see your saber play, but who would have expected that what you used was a trick? She explained further. You let Duel strike first. On the surface, it is letting him take the initiative. However, it was a trick. Why was it a trick? Fu Hongxue did not ask, but his footsteps had stopped. Nihue, when a saber in the sheath, it has hidden strength and power, and nobody knows its sharpness. When a saber is drawn out of the sheath, its sharpness is revealed, and thus nobody would dare to take it lightly. Thus, a saber is at its most priceless at the moment when it is about to strike but yet to strike. She continued, you, of course, understand this principle. That's why you let Duel strike first. A broken bar. Fu Hongxue had been quietly listening, but he suddenly cut her off. That is also saber play, not a trick. Nihue, no. Fu Hongxue, saber play has different techniques and variations, but all share one essence. Her expression was very solemn. that is the highest level of the saber play? Fu Hongxue: not yet. Nihue: then at which stage can one achieve the highest peak of saber play? Fu Hongxue had yet again fallen silent and continued forward. The sun was shining bright. The last ray of sunlight is often the gloriously beautiful. Sometimes life is also the same. Nihue stood stumped at the wall for a long time. Don't tell me that highest peak of saber play is achieved only when there is no variations at all. The shining bright sun had dimmed in a flash. No variations at all. Could that be to surpass the limits of variations? In that case, does that saber still have any reason to exist? Fu Hongxue sighed in this heart. Even he could not answer that question. Why does the saber need to exist? Why does man need to exist? The sunlight had disappeared on the high walls, and Nihue had also disappeared with the sun. But the sun still existed, and Nihue too still existed. What had disappeared momentarily was only their image in Fu Hongxue's vision. Fu Hongxue pushed open the door beneath the high walls and slowly walked in. As soon as he lifted his head, he saw Minayuxin at the high mansion. A broken bar. Despite being on the tall mansion, Fu Hongxue's head was hanging down. Minayuxin asked, "You won?" Fu Hongxue did not answer. By being alive, he had answered. Minayuxin unexpectedly signed. Why must it be like this? Fu Hongxue didn't quite catch her. Why? Minayuxin, you went despite knowing that you would win for sure. He went despite knowing that he would die for sure. This is a deep and profound question, but Fu Hongxue could explain it. Because he is dual and I am Fu Hongxue. His explanation was like his saber. It cut into the heart of the question in one stroke. Minayuxin however was still not satisfied. So, dual had to die because there is a Fu Hongxue in this world. Fu Hongxue, number. Minayuxin, then, what did you really mean? Fu Hongxue, dual had to die because there was a dual in this world. His answer on the surface seemed more deep and profound than the question. But it was actually very simple, very reasonable. Without life, there is no death. With life, there is no escaping from death. Minayuxin could not help but to sign again. It seems that with regards to life and death, you view them very lightly. Fu Hongxue did not deny it. Minayuxin, regarding the life and death of other people, you definitely view it lightly. That is why you left Yan Nanfei back here. Fu Hongxue was silent. After a long while, he slowly asked, "Did Peacock come here?" Minayuxin, yes. Fu Hongxue, Yan Nanfei is still alive? Minayuxin, yes. Fu Hongxue softly said, "When I left him here, perhaps I already knew that he would not die." Minayuxin, but, we're broken bar. Fu Hongxue interrupted her, "As long as your decision has not changed, my promise to you also would not change." Minayuxin, what is your promise? Fu Hongxue, bring you both to Peacock Manor. Minayuxin's eyes lighted up. Now? Fu Hongxue, now. Minayuxin jumped up and turned her back. Do you want me to put on that mask? Fu Hongxue coldly said, don't you already have a mask on your face? Chapter 8: Peacock Manor. A person's face is a mask to begin with. If one can change one's face at will based on one's environment or mood, no one can read that person's expressions and discover what secrets lie hidden in that person's mind. What type of mask could possibly be more clever and ingenious than one's face? The faces of people with high status and of high standings are usually unreadable masks. When Minayuxin saw Kushuiking, the first question in her mind was, I wonder what type of mask he wears on his face. Regardless of what mask he might wear, for the master of the Peacock Manor to personally welcome them is certainly something to be happy about. Brilliant and beautiful are the plumes of a peacock. Brilliant and beautiful is the Peacock Manor. Dark green tiles glowed with jade brilliance under the rays of the setting sun. The white stone steps were as beautiful as jade, passing between golden walls. It seemed as though this entire place was built out of gold, pearls, jewels, and jade. Several peacocks spread their plumes beneath the peach tree in the garden. Upon the pond floated mandarin ducks. Several girls dressed in silks quietly walked past the soft, verdant grass, disappearing into the depths of a forest of flowers, disappearing into this multicolored, splendid garden. The wind carried the faint scent of drunken pleasure. From afar, it sounded as though someone were playing the flute. The world seemed filled with peace and harmony. All three great gates to the house were wide open. Nary a single gatekeeper could be seen. THxChemSci was right there, standing on top of those white stone steps, calmly gazing at Hongxue. He was a very conservative person, in words and deeds. Even if his heart was bursting with joy, he definitely wouldn't reveal any hint of it. When he saw Hongxue, he only lightly smiled. "I didn't imagine that you would come, but you came at a perfect time." Hongxue asked, "Why is this a perfect time?" THxChemSci said, "We happen to have a guest here tonight, and he's not any ordinary guest." Hongxue said, "Who?" THxChemSci said, "Hongxue." Hongxue shut his mouth. No expression could be seen on his face whatsoever. Unexpectedly, Minayuxin also remained composed. THxChemSci glanced at her, then glanced at Yan Nanfei, who had been carried to this place. "They are your friends?" Hongxue neither admitted to it nor denied it. Even he wasn't sure whether they were friends or enemies. THxChemSci didn't ask again. He only turned his body sideways and said, "Please enter." Two people carried Yan Nanfei into the room, with Minayuxin following behind them. She suddenly came to a stop. Staring at THxChemSci, she said, "Master, aren't you going to ask why we are here?" THxChemSci shook his head. "Since you are friends of Hongxue, there is no need for me to ask." "Since there is no need for me to ask, there is no need for me to speak." He was always a man of few words. Minayuxin, however, refused to shut up. She said, "Master, even though you didn't ask, I am still going to tell you." Since she insisted on telling him, THxChemSci listened. Minayuxin said, "We have come for two reasons. First, to avoid misfortune. Second, to beg for medical assistance." "Master, can you take a look at his illness?" THxChemSci finally spoke. "What type of illness is it?" Mingxin said, "Anxiety." THxChemSci suddenly turned his head and stared at her. "Anxiety can only be treated with mental medicine." Minayuxin said, "Yes, I know a broken bar." Just as she spoke these three words, Yan Nanfei shot out of his stretcher like an arrow from a bow. Minayuxin made her move as well. One of them was in front of THxChemSci, the other was behind him. With one in front, and the other behind, they had sealed away all of THxChemSci's escape paths. There is no such thing as a perfect, flawless technique. This assault of theirs, however, approached flawlessness. No one could discover a flaw in their movements, and no one could block or dodge this attack. As a matter of fact, nobody could have possibly imagined that they would suddenly attack like this. Their attack was undoubtedly carefully planned in advance, and undoubtedly had been practiced many times. And thus was the master of the Peacock Manor, whose fame shook the world, defeated on the doorsteps of his very own home, without even a chance to counterattack. In the blink of an eye, the two of them sealed several major acupoints on his arms and his legs. THxChemSci actually didn't fall down, because they were supporting him. Although his body was now stiff and inflexible, the expression on his face was still calm. Even if you searched the whole world over, you couldn't find more than 10 people who would be able to maintain their calm in this situation. After Minayuxin launched her attack and struck out with her palm, she lightly took another breath, then finished her earlier words. "It's precisely because I know that anxiety can only be cured with mental medicine, that we have come here to find you." THxChemSci didn't even glance at her. He only coldly stared at Hongxue. Hongxue remained totally expressionless. THxChemSci said, "Do you know why they came here?" Hongxue shook his head. THxChemSci said, "But you brought them here." Hongxue said, "That's because I too am curious as to why they wanted to come here." The two of them only spoke 3 sentences. The flower garden, which had been filled with peace and tranquility, suddenly became filled with a murderous air. The killing aura came from the blades of 49 swords and sabers. Light reflecting off the sabers and shadows cast by the swords flickered, but the people wielding the weapons did not. With the life of the master of their manor in the hands of others, no one dared to make any rash moves. Kushui King suddenly let out a sigh. Yan Nanfei, Yan Nanfei, how could you do something like this? Yan Nanfei was very startled. You knew who I was all along? Kushui King said. All the land within an 80-li radius belongs to the Peacock Manor. As soon as you entered my territory, I knew who you are and learned everything about you. Yan Nanfei also let out a sigh. It seems as though the Peacock Manor really isn't a place where one can come and go as one pleases. Kushui King said, it's precisely because I know too much about you and your origins, that you were able to subdue me thusly. Yan Nanfei said, because you didn't imagine that I would act like this? Kushui King said, I truly did not. Yan Nanfei forced a smile. To be honest, even I can't imagine it. Minai Uxin interjected. He had no other choice. His illness really is too severe. Kushui King said, do I have medicine that can save him? Minai Uxin said, you do. Only you do. Kushui King said, what medicine is it, exactly? Minai Uxin said, a secret. Kushui King said, a secret? What secret? Minai Uxin said, the secret of the peacock plume. Kushui King shut his mouth. Minai Uxin said, this isn't solely a case of us coercing you. This is a trade. Kushui King said, what will you use to trade? Minai Uxin said, another secret. It's also a secret of the peacock plume. Dusk had fallen. Lanterns were lit. The room was quiet, tastefully laid out, and peaceful. Kushui King undoubtedly was a man of elegant tastes. A pity that his guests were not here to appreciate his refined tastes. As soon as they entered the room, Minai Uxin went straight to the main point. Actually, I too know that the peacock plume was lost during the era of your great-grandfather, Kufeng Wu. This was a secret that no one in the martial world knew. For the first time, Kushui King's expression changed. How do you know this? Minai Uxin said, because Kufeng Wu took the peacock painting and went to find a person. He begged that person to build a second peacock plume. The peacock painting was another secret. It contained within it the graphs and charts needed to build the peacock plume. No one knew whether the peacock painting came first, or the peacock plume came first. Everyone was certain, however, that with the peacock painting, it would be possible to create a second peacock plume. Minai Uxin said, however, this line of thinking is wrong. Kushui King said, how do you know this line of thinking is wrong? Minai Uxin said, the construction of the mechanisms in a hidden projectile is a very complicated procedure that requires a very high degree of skill. Not only did it require a calm, steady, sure hand, it also required metallurgical knowledge as well as an understanding of the principal tenets of hidden projectiles. Minai Uxin said, the person whom Kufeng Wu sought out was naturally the best artisan of his time. Kushui King said, the best artisan of that time was said to be Madame Xu of Sichuan's Tang family. The poisonous hidden projectiles of the Tang family had been world famous for over 4 centuries. It was taught to daughter-in-laws, but never to daughters. Madame Xu was the elder daughter-in-law of the Tang family at that time. Embroidery and manufacturing hidden projectiles were said to be her 2 consummate, unequaled skills. Minai Uxin said, however, although Madame Xu spent 6 years of painstaking care and labor, exhausting herself so utterly that even her hair turned white, she was unable to create a second peacock plume. Kushui King simply watched her, waiting for her to continue. Minai Uxin took out magnificent, resplendent golden tube before she continued. Within those 6 years, Madame Xu did produce 4 peacock plumes. But although they looked identical to the original, and were constructed strictly in accordance with the design mandated by the peacock painting, for some reason they lacked the mysterious, magical power of the original. Gazing at the golden tube in her hand, Kushui King said, this is one of them? Minai Uxin said, correct. Kushui King said, recently, a person nicknamed Day Peacock appeared in the martial world, a broken bar. Minai Uxin said, his peacock plume is one of them as well. Kushui King said, you gave it to him? Minai Uxin said, I didn't personally give it to him. I only arranged for him to stumble across it. Kushui King said, because you intentionally wanted the rumor to be spread throughout the world, the secret of the disappearance of the peacock plume. Minai Uxin did not deny it. Since the peacock plume appeared in the hands of others, naturally it could not be at the peacock manor. Ku Shuiking said, "Why did you do this?" Minai Uxin said, "Because I began to suspect something." Ku Shuiking said, "Suspect what?" Minai Uxin said, "The peacock plume is the lifeline of the peacock manor, and every successive master of the peacock manor has been an extremely careful, extremely steady person." "Use a broken bar," Ku Shuiking said, "thus you always doubted whether or not the peacock plume actually went missing." Minai Uxin nodded. "Supposedly, the peacock plume was lost by Ku Yifeng, the father of Kufeng Wu." Ku Yifeng possessed amazing intelligence and ability. How could he possibly have done something so foolish? Perhaps he was merely testing his son's ability to deal with sudden, unexpected situations when he claimed he lost it. Although her words were logical, there was no real proof behind them. Minai Uxin continued, "Thus, I intentionally revealed this secret, so as to cause the enemies of the peacock manor to come here." Ku Shuiking coldly said, "Not a single person was able to leave alive." Minai Uxin said, "Thus, I felt that my conjecture was certainly correct. The peacock plume must still be in your hands." Ku Shuiking once more shut his mouth, but his sharp, keen, eagle-like gaze never left Minai Uxin. Minai Uxin continued, "Afterwards, Kufeng Wu did not seek out Madame Xu again. Naturally, this was because he found the original peacock plume." Ku Shuiking was silent for a long time. Finally, he said unhurriedly, "Perhaps he never should have sought her out to begin with." Minai Uxin said, "But he trusted her." "Before Madame Xu was married, the two of them were friends." Ku Shuiking coldly laughed. "There are many people in the world who would sell out their friends." Minai Uxin said, "But Madame Xu did not sell him out." "Aside from the direct heirs of the Tang family, no one else knows this secret." The light in Ku Shuiking's eyes grew even more keen. "And you? What relationship do you have to the Tang family?" Minai Uxin grinned. "I never intended to hide this from you to begin with." She slowly continued, "I am the eldest daughter of the Tang family. My original name was Tang Lan." Ku Shuiking said, "Why is it that a child of the Tang family would become a courtesan?" Minai Uxin said, "Although the Tang family specializes in using poisonous hidden projectiles, our rules are much stricter than that of the 7 great sects. The children of the Tang family have never been allowed to get involved in the matters of the martial world." Her voice was tranquil but unyielding. "But we are determined to come out and do something." Ku Shuiking said, "What is your target?" Minai Uxin said, "Oppression." "Our goals can be summarized in 4 words." Ku Shuiking said, "To revolt against oppression." Minai Uxin said, "Right, to revolt against oppression." She continued, "We do not dare to go against the rules of our family. So as to allow ourselves to move about more freely, I have hidden myself within the courtesan's world. Over the past 3 years, we have organized ourselves into a force which can resist oppression. Unfortunately, we still aren't strong enough." Yan Nanfei said, "This is because our enemy is even more tightly organized, and their force is even greater." Ku Shuiking said, "Who is their leader?" Yan Nanfei said, "A person who deserves to die." Ku Shuiking said, "He is the source of your anxiety." Yan Nanfei admitted to it. Ku Shuiking said, "You want to use my peacock plume to kill him?" Yan Nanfei said, "Use violence to defeat violence, and kill to stop a killer." Ku Shuiking looked at him, then looked at Fu Hongxue. He suddenly said, "Release the acupoints on my legs, then come with me." They walked past a giant, beautiful mural, passed through a maple grove, and a clump of bamboo. Just after they crossed a bridge with 9 bends, the lamplight seemed to scatter and dissipate. The dark courtyard seemed to carry an unspeakably gloomy, sinister, desolate aura. Even the lamplight shied away from it. Compared to the magnificent, splendid, palace-like pavilion from earlier, this was a totally different world. The tall, lofty building was filled with a ghastly cold. There were over 100 small lanterns lit within the room, giving off a sad, eerie light. They looked like so many will-o'-the-wisps. In front of every small lantern was a memorial tablet. A name was carved onto every memorial tablet. Each and every single name belonged to an illustrious figure. Several of the names belonged to people who, not long ago, were brief celebrities of the martial world who considered themselves without peer. After seeing the row of memorial tablets, Minayuxin's expression also became very solemn. She knew that these were all people who died to the peacock plume. She hoped to add another memorial tablet and another name to this place. Gongtsayu Kushuiking said, "Our ancestors feared that their descendants would accumulate too much evil karma through their killings, and so set up a memorial site here, so as to help expiate their sins and propitiate the souls of the damned." Next, he took them into the heart of the Peacock Manor. They entered through a paved path through the tomb. The path they took was tortuous and winding. An innumerable number of iron bars and railings could be seen. Everyone silently followed behind him. They felt as though they had suddenly entered the mausoleum of some ancient, long-dead emperor. The place was gloomy, damp, and mysterious. The very last iron gate was formed from a steel plate which was over 3 feet thick. It weighed more than 1,000 jin. There were 13 locks on the gate. The 13 keys were originally guarded by 13 different people. Nowadays, though, trustworthy friends are become fewer and fewer in number. Thus, nowadays only 6 people guarded the keys. All of them were old men with white and grey hair. They numbered amongst them trusted family friends of the Peacock family and illustrious old veterans of the martial world. They all had different backgrounds and various statuses. However, their friendship and loyalty were equally trusted by Kushuiking. Their proficiency in martial arts, naturally, was even more worthy of trust. Kushuiking simply clapped his hands, and all 6 of them appeared out of nowhere like ghosts. The person who appeared the fastest had a gaze like an eagle, and moved like an eagle as well. His experienced, wizened face was crisscrossed with scars and healed wounds. He appeared to be the immortal eagle of heaven, Gongsuntu, whose fame shook the world in years past. The keys were attached to them with an iron chain. The very last key was held by Kushuiking. Minayuxin watched as he opened the very last lock. By the time she turned her head round, the 6 guardians had disappeared. It was as though the ancestors of the Ku family had specially sent the 6 of them from the netherworld, to act as guardian ghosts over this forbidden area. Behind the steel gate was a large stone room. The walls were covered with bluish-green moss, and 6 lamps burned. Underneath the ghastly, gloomy glow of the lamps, all sorts of strange, exotic weapons could be seen on many wooden racks. Some of them not even Yan Nanfei had seen before, and it was unknown as to whether they had been used by the ancestors of the Ku family, or by the Ku family's enemies. Although these weapons were still here, their skeletons and framework had long since rotted away. Kushuiking pushed aside a giant boulder, revealing a steel cabinet hidden behind it. Could it be that the peacock plume was hidden in here? Everyone watched with bated breath as he opened the steel cabinet and reverently, respectfully withdrew a wooden box from within. No one imagined that within the wooden box, there lay not the peacock plume, but a thin yellow skin. Minayuxin didn't try to hide her disappointment. Wrinkling her forehead, she said, "What's this?" The expression on Kushuiking's face became even more solemn and respectful. "This is a person's face." Disappointed, Minayuxin said, "Is it skin that was carved from a person's face?" Kushuiking nodded. His eyes were filled with sorrow. In a dejected voice, he said, "This person lost something that was extremely important." He felt as though he no longer had any face or any right to continue living. Before he committed suicide, he told his servants to carve his skin from his face after his death, to serve as an admonition for future generations. He did not say this person's name, but everyone knew who it was he was speaking about. The news of Ku Yifeng's sudden death was, in that time, a story which caused great suspicion. Only now did Kushuiking reveal the truth of the matter. All the hairs on Minayuxin's body began to rise. After a long time, she let out a long sigh. "You shouldn't have revealed something like this to me." With a calm expression, Kushuiking said, "I didn't want to reveal this either, but I needed for you to believe me." The peacock plume disappeared long ago from the Peacock Manor. Minayuxin said, but those people who recently died at the Peacock Menorah Broken Bar. THxChemSci interrupted her. He coldly said, "There are many ways to kill someone. It isn't necessary to use the peacock bloom." THxChemSci stared at the human skin within the wooden box. When she thought of the tragic and pitiful suicide of that man, who took his own life to atone for his sin, she wished that she had never come here. Yan Nanfei clearly felt a similar regret in his heart. Just at this moment, a clanking sound could be heard as the metal gate swung shut. Next, a series of clicking sounds could be heard. Obviously, the 13 keyholes outside had all been locked. The expression on THxChemSci's face changed. Yan Nanfei sighed. "As we should not have come here, nor heard this secret, much less disturbed the rest of this elder's spirit. We do deserve to die." THxChemSci calmly watched them, not revealing any expression on his face. Yan Nanfei said, "But my life still belongs to Fu Hongxue. Fu Hongxue doesn't deserve to die." THxChemSci coldly said, "I do not deserve to die either." Yan Nanfei stared at him, astonished. THxChemSci interjected, "This wasn't your intention, then?" THxChemSci said, "It is not." THxChemSci was even more shocked. "Then who locked us in here? Who could possibly enter such a secret area?" THxChemSci said, "There are at least 6 people who do." THxChemSci said, "But all of them are your good friends." THxChemSci said, "As I said earlier, there are many people in the world who are willing to sell out their friends." Fu Hongxue finally spoke. "Out of those 6 people, there only needs to be one traitor." THxChemSci said, "Who are you referring to?" Fu Hongxue did not reply. Instead, he asked THxChemSci, "Was the person who opened the very first lock Gongsun too?" THxChemSci said, "Yes." THxChemSci interrupted, "Is it that immortal eagle of heaven, the Gongsun who should have died many times over by now?" THxChemSci said, "Yes." Yan Nanfei asked, "His very last duel to the death, was it with Gongsun?" THxChemSci said, "Yes." Yan Nanfei looked at THxChemSci. THxChemSci looked at Fu Hongxue. All 3 of them shut their mouths. There was no need to ask anything further. Everyone in the martial world was astonished at how Gongsun managed to survive his fight with Gongsun. Only now did they realize that there was nothing astonishing about it at all. Gongsun intentionally let Gongsun live, while bribing him at the same time. Now, the only question which needed to be asked was, is there a second way out of here? None. THxChemSci's response was very succinct. A secret storehouse for precious goods really should not have a second way in or out. THxChemSci let out a breath. It seemed as though her entire body was about to collapse. The metal gate was 3 feet thick. The stone walls were 6 feet thick. No matter who was locked within this stone room, the only thing they could do was to await death. Yan Nanfei suddenly asked, "Is there any wine here?" THxChemSci said, "There is. There's only one jug of wine." "Poison wine?" Yan Nanfei grinned. "Poison wine is better than no wine. Why would a person waiting for certain death be afraid of poisoned wine?" He located the jug of wine, then broke open the seal. But suddenly, there was the flash of a saber and the jug of wine was also shattered. Fu Hongxue coldly said, "Don't forget that your life still belongs to me. Even if you want to die, you need to allow me to kill you." Yan Nanfei said, "When do you plan to make your move?" Fu Hongxue said, "When all hope is lost." Yan Nanfei asked, "What hope do we have right now?" Fu Hongxue said, "As long as you are alive, there is hope." Yan Nanfei laughed loudly. "Wonderful." "Well said." "So long as there is a single breath left in my body, I won't forget those words." Fu Hongxue didn't say so much as another word. It seemed as though he had suddenly become fascinated by the various weapons on the wooden shelves. He slowly walked over to them, carefully examining every single weapon. The cold, gloomy room gradually became hot and suffocating. THxChemSci blew out 3 of the lanterns. Fu Hongxue suddenly removed a chain whip from one of the shelves. The chain whip was made out of links of pure steel. It should be extremely heavy, and yet it didn't seem as heavy as it appeared to be. Fu Hongxue muttered to himself, then asked, "What is the origin of this weapon?" THxChemSci didn't directly answer him. First, he withdrew a very thick accounting book from a cabinet. He blew the dust off of it, then flipped for 10 or so pages before unhurriedly saying, This was left behind by Hongxue. Fu Hongxue asked, Hongxue, of Jiangnan's Thunderbolt Hall? King nodded. The explosive devices of the Thunderbolt Hall were hidden projectiles that were famous throughout the world. But after the appearance of the peacock plume, their prestige began to decline. Thus, Hongxue organized people to come attack us, intending to destroy the peacock manor. Unfortunately, he died to the peacock plume before he even had a chance to strike. A ray of light suddenly seemed to shoot out of Fu Hongxue's eyes. After repeating this to himself, he asked again, he died to the peacock plume before he even had a chance to strike. King nodded again. Although this happened more than a century ago, the events were recorded in this ledger very clearly. THxChemSci said, I've heard of this elder before as well. I seem to recall that his nickname was something like the A Thunderbolt Whip. Fu Hongxue slowly nodded, then once more began to walk along the wall. With his right hand, he gripped his saber. With his left, he held the whip. Suddenly, he closed his eyes. Although the way in which he walked was very peculiar, his face seemed as calm and peaceful as that of an old monk. Watching him, everybody held their breaths. The stone room became as quiet as a tomb. Suddenly, there was a flash of the saber. This saber flash was much brighter than any which Yan Nanfei had ever seen before. With this slash, Fu Hongxue clearly used his internal energy. Although his eyes were firmly shut, this strike landed precisely on one of the cracks on one of the stone walls. He didn't use his eyes to see, he used his heart. As soon as his saber struck out, it sank into the stone wall. Fu Hongxue let out a long sigh as he pulled the blade of his saber from the wall. Just as he finished sighing, he struck out with the chain whip in his left hand, forcefully inserting it into the opening his saber made in the wall. At this moment, there was a sudden booming sound. The chain whip exploded within the opening in the stone wall. The stone wall, which had been fashioned using 6 feet of solid rock, exploded as well. Broken stones scattered all over the place, flying about like rain. And then, everything was quiet once more. A large hole had been blown into the stone wall. Fu Hongxue had already sheathed his saber. He only said in a light voice, the explosive weapons of Jiangnan's Thunderbolt Hall are really without peer. King, THxChemSci, and Yan Nanfei quietly gazed at him. Their eyes were filled with respect. How did you know that this chain whip was filled with explosives? I didn't know, Fu Hongxue said. I only felt that the whip seemed to weigh less than it should. Thus, the insides of it were probably hollow. As fortune would have it, I suddenly thought of Hongxue. Hongxue's midnight assault on the Peacock Manor was one of the most famous war stories of the martial world. Of the 72 greatest battles the martial world had ever seen, at least 7 occurred at the Peacock Manor. And yet, the Peacock Manor almost miraculously continued to remain standing in good health. But as soon as they walked out, they discovered that the Peacock Manor, which had braved fire and misfortune for so long, had turned into a large pile of rubble. Its 9 great courtyards, 36 towers, and 80 square li of terrain had been turned into debris. The fresh blood had not yet fully dried, and so, King stood in the middle of blood-soaked trouble. 80 square li of land, 500 lives, 30 generations of fame. They had all been destroyed. It was as though an evil miracle had taken place. King neither moved, nor shed tears. This sort of hatred and enmity could no longer be washed away by tears. The only thing he wanted to shed was blood. But he could not find the person who had caused this disaster. The sky was gloomy and dark. The land all around them was barren and still. It seemed as though the 4 of them were the only living things in the world. Yan Nanfei stood off to one side, far away. It seemed as though he were even more pained than King. Fu Hongxue had been staring at him for a long time. He coldly said, "You are blaming yourself and condemning yourself. You feel you brought this misfortune upon him?" Yan Nanfei slowly nodded his head. Several times, he wanted to speak, but forbore. Contradictions racked his heart, increasing his pain. Finally, he was no longer able to resist. He suddenly said, "This is the 3rd time." Fu Hongxue said, "The 3rd time?" Yan Nanfei said, "The first time was the Phoenix Assembly. The second time was the family garden. This is the 3rd time." He spoke very quickly, because he had already decided to reveal all of the secrets. In this day and age, the person with the highest level of martial arts ability isn't you, it is Hongxue. His words were very honest and frank. Although your saber has nearly reached the level of being all-conquering and unstoppable, you yourself still have weaknesses. How about you? Fu Hongxue said, I practice the sword of the heart, the sword of the intention. When heart and mind come together, there is nothing one cannot do. Originally, this is a style which approaches the highest levels of swordsmanship. If I can master it, I will be invincible. You cannot master it? It is as though mastery of this style is blocked by 13 locks. I know I have all the keys to the locks, but after I open 12 of them, I cannot find the 13th. Yan Nanfei forced to laugh. Thus, whenever I execute my strikes, I feel as though my power does not come from the heart. Sometimes, when I send out an attack, it clearly is about to land on target, but when it actually reaches the target, it's actually off by an inch. Fu Hongxue asked, how about Hongxue? Yan Nanfei said, not only is his martial arts all-conquering and unstoppable, it is invulnerable as well. In the entire world, there are perhaps only two things which can defeat him. Fu Hongxue said, one is the peacock bloom. Yan Nanfei said, the other is sorrowful book of yin and yang and of heaven and hell mingling. Within this book was recorded the 7 most vile, vicious martial arts techniques in the history of the world. According to legends, when this book was written, the heavens wept blood, ghosts wailed at night, and after the author finished the very last word, he himself vomited blood and died. Fu Hongxue naturally heard of this legend as well. But as soon as this book was written, it disappeared. No one in the world has ever seen it. Yan Nanfei said, this book definitely was lost a long time ago, but it just as definitely resurfaced recently. Fu Hongxue asked, where did it reappear? Yan Nanfei replied, the Phoenix Market. A year ago, when he went to the Phoenix Market, he went for the purpose of finding this book. Fu Hongxue happened to be there as well. Yan Nanfei said, at the time, I was certain that you must have gone there to find the book as well. I felt that it was very likely that you two had been bought and paid for by Hongxue, which is why I attacked you. But he had lost. Although he wanted to kill Fu Hongxue hadn't wanted to kill him. Thus, all of these tragic, mysterious, and dangerous events had occurred. Yan Nanfei said, after I battled you, my mind fell apart. It took me 4 hours before I was able to go to the Phoenix Market again. But by then, the Phoenix Market had been turned into a ghost town. Without question, it had been sacked by the subordinates of Hongxue. Yan Nanfei said, that morning, 4 of the 7 heroes of the Ni family had visited the Phoenix Market. They arrived and left in a hurry, and at first they didn't arouse anyone's attention. But I couldn't help but want to go talk with them and find out what was going on. I didn't imagine that as a consequence of my trip, their precious courtyard, which had been painstakingly maintained for over 13 generations, would be turned into a barren wasteland. After thinking for a moment longer, he added, that it was the day I first met Minai Uxin. She hadn't been there for more than 5 days. Fu Hongxue clenched both his fists tightly. After a long time passed, he finally said slowly, although to this very day you still have not actually seen the sorrowful book, who knows how many people have been destroyed due to it. Yan Nanfei's fists were also tightly clenched. Thus, I must kill Hongxue and avenge the deaths of those murdered souls. Fu Hongxue said, thus, he must kill you as well. They stopped speaking, because at this time, Ku Shuiking slowly walked over towards them. His face was still expressionless. Even his sharp, keen eyes had turned hollow and dull. He stood in front of them for a long time, as though he were a man made from wood. Only then did he mumble, as though he were sleepwalking, the members of the Ku family are all dead now. But their corpses remain. Only one person is missing. Fu Hongxue said. Gongsun. Ku Shuiking nodded. It isn't an easy feat to totally eradicate every member of the Ku family. They must have casualties of their own as well. However, they've taken them all away. Yan Nanfei couldn't resist saying, these people have always been very neat and tidy in handling their affairs, not leaving behind any trace. Fu Hongxue said, but this many people couldn't have simply disappeared. No matter where they go, They'll have left some clues of their passing behind. King looked at him. In his eyes could be seen an expression of gratitude. He suddenly said, "My wife is often sick, so I have another woman in the city. By now, she is 6 months pregnant. If she gives birth to a son, he will be the last descendant of the Ke family." He slowly added, "Her surname is Zhao. Her name is Zhao Yazin. Her father's name is Zhao Donglai. He is a master of darts." Fu Hongxue quietly listened to him. He paid very careful attention to every word. King let out a long breath. "I should attend to these matters personally, but I no longer am able to. If I bear more shame and cling to life, in the future, when I go to the netherworld, I will have no face left to meet the ancestors of the Ke family." Yan Nanfei shouted in a fierce voice, "You cannot die. Don't you want to get revenge?" King suddenly let out a laugh. His laughter was even more miserable than weeping. "Revenge? You want me to get revenge? Do you know what type of person Gong Xiu is? Do you know how great his power is?" Yan Nanfei naturally knew. No one knew better than him, aside from the Beggars clan and the 7 great sword sects, which had been long established historical organizations. At least half of the 39 other most powerful organizations of the martial world had extremely close relationships with Gong Xiu. At least 8 or 9 of them were secretly under the direct command of Gong Xiu. In addition, the number of first-class masters who had been bought and paid for by Gong Xiu were innumerable. In addition, there were 1 or 2 masters amongst his bodyguards who possessed a level of martial arts that was unfathomably deep. Yan Nanfei was about to reveal everything he knew about Gong Xiu, but King was no longer interested in listening. King still stood there unmoving. But suddenly, fresh blood began to spurt from his ears, his eyes, his nostrils, and his mouth. Just as he fell down, from far away the sound of a rooster crowing could be heard. The Peacock Manor was surrounded on 2 sides by mountains and a third by water. The mountains were very steep. There was no one that injured people could be brought across them. The river water moved at a torrential pace. Even rafts covered by sheepskin could not pass it. The Peacock Manor had been guarded tightly, and did not lack for experts. To totally eradicate everyone in the manor would have required at least 30 or 50 first-class masters. Even if the invaders had come by water or through the mountain passes, there was only one way they could have left. In front of the manor was a thick forest. There was a wide, paved road by it, but not a single wheel track or hoofprint could be seen, nor was there any blood or footprints. Minai Uxin gritted her teeth. "No matter what, we must find a third person today," Fu Hongxue said. "Aside from Zhao Yazin and Gong Santu, who else is there?" Minai Uxin said, "Peacock. I've already subdued him and sent him back undercover. I'm sure he can provide us with some clues." Yan Nanfei coldly said, "Unfortunately, every clue he gives us is possibly a trap." Minai Uxin said, "A trap?" Yan Nanfei said, "He fears you, but I guarantee that he fears Gong Xiu more. If he didn't leak out secrets out to Gong Xiu, how could Gong Xiu have come to the Peacock Manor at such a perfect time?" Minai Uxin said with hatred, "If your guess is correct, all the more reason for me to hunt him down." Fu Hongxue said, "But the first person we must find is not him. It is Zhao Yazin." None of them knew Zhao Yazin, but Zhao Donglai was a famous person. He was a famous alcoholic. He was already drunk when they found him. He lay drunk beneath the shade of a tree in his courtyard. However, as soon as he heard King's name, he jumped to his feet and cursed, "That old bastard! I treated him as a friend, but he went around behind my back and tricked my daughter into falling for him." They didn't try to shut him up. The more angrily he cursed, the more he proved that the affair was real. As long as they could preserve this last bit of flesh and blood of King's family, it didn't matter how much Zhao Donglai cursed. His daughter, however, couldn't take any more. All of his cursing had caused her to be driven away. On top of her boudoir in the room, she had left a letter. A young girl with long pigtails was bent over the dressing table, weeping non-stop. On the letter was written, "Your daughter was unfilial, and has disgraced your home. Because of this piece of flesh growing inside of me, I cannot kill myself to redeem the shame a broken bar." The young girl said, "So the young miss left." "I couldn't stop her." "You don't know where she went?" "If I knew, I would have gone as well. Why would I stay here? If there was a drunken demon in the house, no one would want to stay. And so they left as well. However, they still needed to find Zhao Yazin. How were they supposed to find her within the sea or people? Minai Uxin suddenly said, "There's a place where I'm sure we'll find her." Yan Nanfei immediately said, "What place?" Minai Uxin said, since he didn't want her father to know about their affair, THxChemSci certainly must have prepared a secret place for the two of them to have their trysts. Even the boss of the small drapery shop outside could find a lover's meeting place for his mistress, much less the master of the Peacock Manor. Unfortunately, that place must be extremely well hidden. THxChemSci has always been a very prudent, circumspect person. Aside from himself, who might know about this? There's one person who must know. Who? That little girl with long pigtails. Minai Uxin spoke with great certainty. The relationship and affection between a young miss and her personal serving girl can be very close, almost like that between sisters. If I did something like this, there's no way I could hide it from Xingxing. Xingxing was the name of her own personal serving girl. That little girl had a sly, clever look about her. She was just putting on an act for us earlier. Within the hour, she'll go out to look for her. Minai Uxin wasn't wrong. Before an hour had passed, the little girl secretly snuck out from the back door and crept down a side alley. Minai Uxin secretly watched her, while Fu Hongxue and Yan Nanfei watched Minai Uxin. It's never easy for an unmarried maiden to travel around by herself, so their trysting place can't be too far away. Minai Uxin was right once again. The place was only 2 alleys away, with high walls and a narrow doorway. It was a quiet and secluded courtyard, with a ginkgo tree growing in the middle and around 10 or so Chinese roses growing on top of the wall. The door wasn't latched evidently. The little girl was expected. The little girl glanced all around, then quietly pushed the door open, entered, then closed and locked the door. A delicate fragrance floated down from the Chinese roses on the top of the wall, and the leaves of the ginkgo tree were blown to and fro by the wind. No human voices could be heard at all within the courtyard. "Go inside first. We'll wait for you outside." Minai Uxin knew all along that the two men would not be willing to rashly charge into a young girl's private bedroom. This is because they were real men, men amongst men. They watched as she jumped over the wall. They waited for a long time. The roses still smelled just as sweet, but from within the yard could be heard a cry of alarm. It was Minai Uxin's voice. Minai Uxin definitely wasn't the type of woman who would be easily frightened. The leaves of the ginkgo tree were so thick, they cast a shadow into the room, the insides of which were as dark as dusk. The body of the serving girl was bent over on the table. Her dark, oily pigtail had been wrapped around her throat. Her hands and her feet were as cold as ice. Minai Uxin's hands and feet were cold as well. "We came just a little too late." The little girl had been choked to death. Zhao Yazin was nowhere to be seen. No one would choke themselves to death with their own pigtail. Who was the killer? Yan Nanfei clenched his fists. It seems as though the affair between Zhao Yazin and THxChemSci isn't something which was kept totally secret after all. Thus, Gong Zhayu's subordinates arrived one step ahead of them. Fu Hongxue's face was pale white, but a hint of red could be seen in his eyes. He was searching. He hoped that the murderer, in his haste, might have left some clues behind this time. Just one act of negligence, just a single clue. If it was there, Fu Hongxue would not miss it. This time, he almost missed it, simply because this clue was too obvious. There was a small mirror on top of the dressing stand. Someone had written 3 words on the mirror with rouge. The words were written very hastily and sloppily. Clearly, they had been left behind by Zhao Yazin. In his haste, the man who had kidnapped her didn't notice. Why is it that the most obvious things are the things people pay the least attention to? Blood red rouge. Blood red words. Ziyang Temple. Zheng Temple was a very ordinary name. There were many Taoist temples named Zheng Temple, but as luck would have it, there was only a single temple in this city by that name. How did she know they would take her to the Zheng Temple? Perhaps she overheard it. Perhaps her kidnappers numbered amongst them a priest of Zheng Temple. She was born and raised here. Naturally, she'd recognize them. Either way, they would have to go and check it out. Even if this was a trap, they still had to go. Unexpectedly, The courtyard of the Zeng temple was also covered by a vibrantly growing ginkgo tree. Incense smoke curled round about the main hall. Not a single person could be seen. But as soon as they entered the backyard, they could hear voices. What a cold, desolate courtyard. What a cold, icy voice. It only said 2 words. Please enter. The voice came from a guest room towards the left. It seemed as though the people inside were waiting for them all along. It seemed as though this was a trap after all. But when were these 3 ever afraid of others' traps? Without even thinking, Fu Hongxue walked over. The door was left unlocked. With a light push, he opened it. There were 4 people within the room. As long as he decided to do something, and as long as his saber was in his hand, even if there were thousands of soldiers in front of him, Fu Hongxue wouldn't shrink back in the slightest. Much less just 4 people. 1 of the 4 was drinking wine. 2 were playing chess. The 4th was a young man in white who was using a small knife to trim his nails. No lamps were lit in the room. The young man's face looked just like the blade of his knife, white with black showing through, so black, it was frightening. Of the 2 playing chess, 1 was indeed a Taoist priest. His beard and his hair were all white, but his face was as red and ruddy as a baby's. The other player wore black clothes and white socks. He was dressed simply, with only a ring on his finger. But the ring was made out of priceless hand jade, the value of which was enough to purchase several cities. Fu Hongxue's pupils suddenly contracted. His ashen pale face suddenly became flushed with a red color. This was because the person who had been drinking with his head lowered had begun to slowly lift up his face. After she saw this person's face, Minai Uxin's hands and feet turned ice cold again. His face was crisscrossed with scars and wounds. His eyes were as keen as an eagle's. It was the immortal eagle of heaven, Hongxue. He was watching them as well, and within his keen gaze there was a hint of cruel mockery. Please sit. There really were 3 empty seats in the guest room, and Fu Hongxue actually sat down. It was always good to conserve a little bit of energy just before a vicious life and death battle was about to break out. Yan Nanfei and Minai Uxin both sat down as well. They too knew that the time had come for a battle where life and death would be determined in the blink of an eye. Chapter 9. Betting one's life on a single saber. The sound of the apricot tree in the courtyard gently rustling in the wind could be heard. The sound of chess pieces being placed on the chessboard were gentle and tasteful, as though they were a musical instrument. There was no expression at all on the face of the young man in white who was trimming his nails. The 2 who were playing chess didn't even bother to raise their heads. Minai Uxin couldn't keep herself from saying, "We didn't come here to watch you play chess." Hongxue said, "I know you have come here to find me. I am the one who bathed the peacock manor in blood." "You didn't find the wrong person." Minai Uxin's hands clenched into fists, her fingernails piercing into her flesh. "And the other 3?" Hongxue didn't directly answer. Instead, he first introduced the young man in white. "This is the son of Liu Ouyang's Xiao family, Xiao Siwu. Siwu means A4 with Houts," he explained. "The A4 with Houts means this: his flying dagger skill is without equal. He has killed people without number, and when angered, without mercy. The 4th without, even when he isn't angered, he's still without mercy." Hongxue continued, "He also has another nickname, a very long and strange one. He'll go to heaven or hell to seek out little Li, and wholeheartedly wishes to kill Yikai. In former years, little Li's flying dagger overawed the world. Once his flying dagger was sent out, it would never miss. His glorious, magnificent fame had not yet been matched to this very day by any. Yikai received tutelage from him, and gained the essence of his flying dagger. He roamed the martial world for 30 carefree years, and although he didn't kill a single person without good reason, no one dared to offend him." Minai Uxin said, "Not only is this merciless young man certain that he can kill Yikai, he also wants to seek out Li Danhua and compete in martial arts against him?" Hongxue said, "That seems to be so." Minai Uxin laughed. "He seems to be very arrogant." Hongxue said, "Very arrogant people tend to have the ability to back up their arrogance." Minai Uxin said, That seems to be so. Hongxue Tan smiled. But actually, it isn't. Minai Uxin laughed. The more arrogant one is, the less actual ability one has. There are many people in the martial world who are like that. Hongxue Tan's smile was meant to sow discord, but her laughter was nothing short of a direct challenge. These words of hers clearly were meant for Xiao Suwu to hear, but it seemed as though this haughty young man hadn't even heard her words. His features remained totally emotionless. The dagger in his hand moved very slowly, and every single motion was extremely careful, as though he were very much afraid that he might cut his hand. His hand was very steady, and his fingers were long and very strong. Fu Hongxue never paid attention to people's hands, but he now paid attention to this person's. He observed every single movement very carefully. Trimming one's fingernails isn't really all that exciting. It's not worth watching. However, Xiao Suwu seemed to become very uncomfortable underneath Fu Hongxue's stare. He suddenly said in a cold voice, "Watching a person trim his fingernails isn't as good as watching people play chess." Hongxue laughed, especially since these two chess players are grandmasters of our time. Minai Uxin blinked a few times. This Taoist priest would be the boss of the Ziguan temple. It seemed as though Hongxue Tan once more wanted to cause trouble. He intentionally asked, "What boss does the Ziguan temple have?" Minai Uxin laughed. "In a Taoist temple, the head Taoist priest would be the boss. In a house, the madam would be the boss." A boss is a title that can be applied to all sorts of people. The white-haired man picked up a chess piece, then suddenly turned his head and smiled towards her. "That's right, I'm the boss of this place." Minai Uxin sweetly said, "How has business been recently?" The white-haired man said, "Passable. No matter what time it is, there's always some stupid husband or stupid wife who comes here offering incense or fragrant oils. And of course, during beautiful spring and autumn days, business is very brisk." When he spoke, he really sounded as though he were a boss. Laughing, Minai Uxin became even more cheerful. "Bosses are usually very boring people. I didn't expect you to be such an interesting boss." The white-haired man said, "I'm the sort of man who abstains from nothing at all." He also smiled very cheerfully, but Minai Uxin's laughter suddenly seemed very forced. "Abstains from nothing at all? Boss, what is your surname?" The white-haired man said, "My surname is Yang." Minai Uxin said, "Yang Wuji?" The white-haired man said, "That seems to be so." Minai Uxin was no longer able to laugh. She knew of this person. 30 years ago, he shared an equal amount of fame with the sect leader of wielding, the Taoist priest Bashan. He was known as one of the A7 great swordsmen of the outer regions. She also knew that there were 4 lines in a poem which described him. The first line was "A abstains from nothing at all," and so was the fourth. Very few people knew these 4 lines. A abstains from nothing at all. As soon as he laughs he kills. If he intends to kill someone, he abstains from nothing at all. Supposedly, if this Taoist were to treat you very coldly, that means he considers you a friend. But if he were to laugh at you and treat you very kindly, there usually is only one reason for that: he will kill you. In addition, it was said that after he had decided to kill you, he would abstain from nothing at all and would kill you regardless of the relationship you had with him. In addition, no matter where one went, he would hunt you down and kill you. Just now, he laughed with her, and in fact he was still laughing. When was he planning to make his move? Minai Uxin stared at him, not daring to look away for a second. Unexpectedly, Yang Wuji turned his head around again. With a light clinging sound, he placed the chess piece in his hand on the board. After playing that chess piece, he swept all the pieces on the board off. With a sigh, he said, "You truly are a grandmaster." "I admit defeat." The middle-aged man in black clothes with white socks said, "That wrong move is wholly due to the fact that you were distracted by others." "How can it count as a defeat?" Yang Wuji said, "A single wrong move can cause total disaster." "How can it not count as a defeat?" In addition, playing chess is like swordsmanship. One should be totally focused and not allow oneself to be distracted. If one can be distracted by others, how can he be considered an expert? Hongxue laughed. "Fortunately, although it is easy for you to be distracted while playing chess, you are never distracted while wielding your sword." Yang Wuji lightly said, "Fortunately, that is the case. That's the only reason why I've been able to stay alive up till now." The middle-aged man in black clothes with white clothes sighed. "Unfortunately, although I am never distracted while playing chess, when I begin competing in swords with others, my mind becomes as muddled and chaotic as the spring grass." Minai-uxin said, "Your surname, sir?" The man in black said, I can't say." Minai-uxin asked, "Why can't you say?" The man in black said, "Because I'm a nameless, ordinary fellow. The only thing I am good at is chess." Minai-uxin asked, "You're a chess prodigy? Who's chess prodigy?" Yan Nanfei suddenly chuckled. "Naturally, he is Hongxue's chess prodigy." The man in black seemed to just notice him. He immediately chuckled, then cupped his hands and said, "Oh, so it's young Master Yan." Yan Nanfei said, "Unfortunately, I'm not your young master." The man in black smiled. "Young master, do you play chess?" Yan Nanfei said, "I barely have the time to flee for my life these days. How could I have the energy to play chess?" The man in black laughed. "I, on the other hand, would be willing to lose my life for the sake of playing chess. Why worry about running for my life?" Yan Nanfei laughed loudly, and the man in black smiled as well. Evidently, the two of them were already acquainted with a chess prodigy like this. What type of person might his young master be? Yan Nanfei asked again, "Does your young master play any chess?" The man in black said, "He does not." Yan Nanfei smiled. "I imagine it isn't because he is too busy fleeing for his life. It's because he is too busy taking the lives of others." The man in black laughed loudly, and Yan Nanfei smiled. Was the person they were speaking of Hongxue? Yan Nanfei and Hongxue used to be friends? The man in black cupped his hands again. "Young master, rest here for a bit longer. I must bid you farewell." Yan Nanfei asked, "Why don't you sit for a while longer as well?" The man in black said, "I came to play chess. Now that there's no chess game going on, why should I stay?" Yan Nanfei said, "In order to kill people." The man in black said, "Kill people? Who wants to kill people?" Yan Nanfei said, "Me." His face suddenly sank, and he turned to stare coldly at Hongxue. "The person I want to kill is you." Hongxue didn't seem surprised at all. He let out a sigh, then said, "Why do you want to kill me?" Yan Nanfei said, "Because you have killed far too many people." Hongxue lightly said, "And there are quite a few people who want to kill me. But I am still alive." Yan Nanfei replied, "You've lived for far too long. I'm afraid that today will be the day you must die." Hongxue said leisurely, "Today is a day of dying. I just don't know who will be the one to die." Yan Nanfei laughed coldly. At that very moment, he drew forth his sword from beneath his clothes, the rose sword. This soft sword could actually be stuck around one's waist normally, as though it were a belt. The soft leather scabbard was dyed red using some unknown material, so red that it looked like a spring rose in full bloom. When he saw this sword, Hongxue couldn't help but reveal a look of respect in his eyes. "I recognize this sword. It was refined 100 times and smelted 1,000 times over. It is soft, yet unyielding. It really is a rare, incredible tool." Yan Nanfei said, "I also know about your hook." "Where is your hook?" Hongxue laughed. "When did you ever see a person using a hook to pick flowers?" Yan Nanfei said, "Pick flowers?" Hongxue said, "Isn't a rose a flower?" The man in black suddenly said, "If you want to pick a rose, you had best remember that roses have thorns. The thorns can do more than just prick one's hand, they can also prick one's heart." Hongxue said, "I have no heart to be pricked." The man in black said, "But you have a hand which can be hurt." Hongxue laughed again, then said without a care, "If he pricks my hand, I shall prick his heart." The man in black said, "What will you use to prick his heart?" Hongxue said, "A person." The man in black asked, "Who?" Hongxue said, "Zhao Yazhen." The man in black asked, "So if he hurts you, you will kill Zhao Yazhen?" Hongxue nodded. "Zhao Yazhen cannot die, and therefore I cannot die either. The only one who can die is him." The man in black said, "So you have placed yourself in an invincible position for this battle?" Hongxue said, "That was the case all along." Smiling, he looked at Yan Nanfei. "So by now, you should have realized who will be the person to die today." Yan Nanfei said, "You." He coldly continued, "Only a dead person can be guaranteed to not kill others. I intend to make sure that Zhao Yuzhen stays alive. But even more do I intend to make sure that you die." Gongsun let out a sigh. "It seems you still don't understand, since you didn't hear the words I said earlier," the man in black said. "But I heard them." Gongsun said. "What did I say?" The man in black said. "You said that as soon as you see blood, immediately kill Zhao Yuzhen." Gongsun said. "Who did I say that to?" The man in black said. "I don't recognize that person. All I know is that you called him a forefinger." Gongsun said. "Where is he right now?" The man in black said. "He took Zhao Yuzhen with him and left." Gongsun said. "Where did he go?" The man in black said. "I don't know." Gongsun said. "Who knows?" The man in black said. "It seems nobody knows." Gongsun said. "No one knows to begin with." Smiling, he looked at Yan Nanfei. "Do you fully understand now?" Yan Nanfei nodded, but still did not bat an eyelid. Gongsun said. "So whose death day shall today be?" Yan Nanfei said. "Yours." Gongsun shook his head, smiling wryly. "It seems that not only is this fellow very stubborn, he's also very stupid. Even now, he doesn't understand." Yan Nanfei said. "The one who doesn't understand is you, because despite all of your calculations, there is something you have forgotten." Gongsun said. "Oh?" Yan Nanfei said. "You forgot that I cannot die and do not want to die. What's more, if I die, I still won't be able to save Zhao Yuzhen. Why would I let you kill me? Why wouldn't I kill you?" Gongsun was startled. "Since nobody can die, what do you propose?" Yan Nanfei said. "Pull out your hook and give my sword a try. If I cannot defeat you within 10 stances, I will give you a person's life." Gongsun said. "Whose life?" Yan Nanfei said. "My life." Gongsun said. "And if you defeat me, I must give you a life as well?" Yan Nanfei said. "Naturally." Gongsun said. "Whose life do you want?" "Zhao Yuzhen's." Yan Nanfei said. "I want to see you respectfully presenting her to me." Gongsun mumbled to himself for a while, then asked the man in black, "Did Yan Nanfei personally say those words just then?" The man in black said, "He did." Gongsun asked, "Is Yan Nanfei the type of person who keeps his word?" The man in black said, "His promise is worth its weight in gold. Even if he dies, he won't go back on it." Gongsun suddenly began to laugh again. He loudly laughed. "Actually, everything I have said up till now was to get you to make that promise." By the time his laughter ended, his hook appeared in his hand. A hook as bright as snow, eyes as keen as an eagle's, a smile as cruel as a hawk's. Although his weapon was very heavy, its transformations were light and complicated. Gongsun smiled. "Do you know what's the good thing about this hook?" Yan Nanfei said. "Go ahead and tell me." Gongsun lightly stroked the tip of the hook. "Although this hook is very heavy, in a small room, it can be used freely." "How about your sword?" Yan Nanfei said. "If you can force me out of this room, you can consider me as having lost." Gongsun laughed loudly. "Great. Why haven't you drawn your sword yet?" Yan Nanfei said. "There's no need for me to draw my sword." Gongsun said. "No need?" Yan Nanfei said. "Even a sheathed sword can still kill." "Why should I draw it out?" "After I pull it out, perhaps it'll become unable to kill." Gongsun said. "Why is that?" Yan Nanfei said. "Because the ingenuity of this sword lies not in the tip but in the scabbard." Gongsun did not understand. "Can it be that the scabbard of the sword is even sharper than its point?" Yan Nanfei gently stroked the bright red scabbard. "Do you know what was used to dye the scabbard red?" Gongsun did not know. Yan Nanfei said, "The juice of the A-blood rose." Gongsun clearly did not know what a A-blood rose was. He had never heard of it. Yan Nanfei said, "The A-blood rose is a rose that has been irrigated using 5 different types of poisoned blood." Gongsun said, 5 types of poison blood? What 5? Yan Nanfei said, "The 7-inch serpent, the 100-sectioned centipede, the 1,000-year-old cold snake, and the blazing red poisonous scorpion." Gongsun said, "And the last one?" Yan Nanfei coldly said, "The last one is the blood of unfilial, unjust traitors and villains." Gongsun was unable to laugh this time. Yan Nanfei said, "The creatures which the rose sword kills are these 5 types. If it meets a filial son, a loyal official, or an honorable man, then there is no way for the power of the sword to be released." Gongsun sneered, The power of the scabbard? Yan Nanfei didn't deny it. If it meets with the 5 poisons, the flower soul of the rose sword come to life. Staring at Gongsun, he said, if you are one of the 5 poisons, at this moment you will smell a strange, mystical fragrance. The flower soul of the rose sword will be silently draining away your soul. Gongsun laughed loudly. As he laughed, every single scar on his face writhed and contorted, as though they were poisonous snakes. Yan Nanfei said, you don't believe me? Gongsun said, your sword might have a flower soul, but my hook has a soul as well. Yan Nanfei said, what is it? Gongsun said, the soul of wrongfully killed ghosts. His laughter sounded ferocious, and his features were terrible to behold. I don't know how many lives have been lost to this hook and have been trapped in it. All of them are waiting for me to find a replacement fall guy for them, so that they might escape and reincarnate. Yan Nanfei said, I believe it. I can also believe that the person they want to find the most is you. Gongsun said, why haven't you made your move yet? Yan Nanfei said, I already have. The smile on Gongsun's face disappeared. It was as though all the poisonous serpents writhing on his face had suddenly been frozen. Yan Nanfei's sword really had started to move. It was moving very slowly, carrying with it a very strange rhythm. It was as though the petals of a rose were slowly blooming in the spring wind. There wasn't a hint of any force which could be used to take someone's life. Gongsun sneered, and struck out with his hook. His strike was fast and accurate. His many years' worth of life and death experiences had caused him to discard the usage of flowery, pretty-to-behold techniques. Every single attack of his was definitely effective, but his attack was somehow drawn into that strange, bizarre rhythm of the rose sword, as though a sharp shell was drawn into the waves of the ocean. When the tides retreated, all of his attacking force was dissipated with it, and then he smelled a strange, mysterious fragrance. Everything in front of him turned a scarlet red color, and aside from this bright red, he couldn't see anything else. It was as though a red curtain had suddenly been draped in front of his eyes. His heart trembled. He wanted to use the hook in his hand to brush aside this red curtain, to pierce through it, but his reflexes had slowed down and his movements has become sluggish. By the time the bright red curtain disappeared, the rose sword was already resting on his throat. He suddenly felt his throat go dry, and his mouth was filled with a bitter, astringent taste. In addition, he felt exhausted, so exhausted that he could vomit. With a dinging sound, his hook fell to the floor. Yang Wuji let out a long sigh. Clearly, he too had felt that mysterious power which had radiated from the sword earlier. He had practiced the sword for more than 40 years, but he actually couldn't tell what type of technique Yan Nanfei had used. The man in black also let out a breath. He slowly said, this is the sword of the heart? Can it be a flower soul really exists in that sword? Yan Nanfei said, it hasn't come to life yet, it just briefly woke up. The expression on the face of man in black's changed. What if it really did come to life? A solemn look was on Yan Nanfei's face. He slowly said, if the flower soul were to come to life, then a long-cherished dream of mine would have been achieved. I would die without any regrets. The man in black said, when the flower soul comes to life, must someone die? Yan Nanfei said, beyond a doubt, someone would die. The man in black said, what type of person would die? Yan Nanfei said, at least 2 people. One person is myself, the other is a broken bar. He didn't finish, and the man in black didn't push him to continue. On both men's faces suddenly appeared very strange expressions. Suddenly, both of them laughed. Yan Nanfei's laughter was more joyful too. The rose sword continued to rest on Gongzutu's throat. He knew that he would soon be able to see Zhao Yazun harness a horse to a carriage. First have Miss Zhao escorted into the cart, then escort us out. Gongsun totally acceded to his demands. Smiling, Minai Uxin rose to her feet. She couldn't help but feel relieved as well. This time, at least, they weren't defeated. Xiao Suwu was still trimming his fingernails. His hand remained just as steady as before, but his cold eyes revealed a hint of impatience and anxiety. This was because Fu Hongxue was still staring at him. Even when Yan Nanfei made his strike, Fu Hongxue's gaze hadn't flickered in the slightest. It seemed as though aside from this young man's hands, There was nothing else in the world worth Fu Hongxue paying attention to. Faint blue veins were gradually revealing themselves on the back of Xiao Suwu's hands. It seemed as though he were using a great deal of strength to keep his hands so steady. His movements were still very meticulous, and even his posture hadn't changed. This really was not easy to do at all. Fu Hongxue suddenly said, "Your hands are very stable." Xiao Suwu lightly said, "They always have been stable." Fu Hongxue said, "When you make your move, you are very quick. In addition, even after the dagger leaves your hand, the dagger itself continues to hold variations." Xiao Suwu said, "You can tell?" Fu Hongxue nodded. "I can tell that you throw your dagger using 3 fingers, which is why you are able to impart a circular force to your dagger. I can also tell that you throw your dagger using your left hand. First you throw the dagger, and then you aim at the target." Xiao Suwu said, "How can you tell?" Fu Hongxue said, "Your thumb, index finger, and middle finger on your left hand are exceptionally strong." Xiao Suwu forced a smile to his face. "Good eyesight." Fu Hongxue said, "Good dagger." Xiao Suwu arrogantly said, "Of course it is." Fu Hongxue said, "Although it is a good dagger, it still cannot compare to Ye Kai's." Xiao Suwu's movements came to a halt. Fu Hongxue finally stood up as well. "After Ye Kai's flying dagger leaves his hand, there is perhaps only a single person in this day and age who can defeat it." The blue veins on the back of Xiao Suwu's hand bulged. "And my dagger?" Fu Hongxue dully said, "At the very least, there are 3 people in this room alone who can defeat your dagger." Xiao Suwu said, "Are you one of the 3? Fu Hongxue said, "Naturally." He slowly turned round. Without even bothering to look back, he walked out. Xiao Suwu watched him leave. Unexpectedly, he did not move, and did not say another word. His knife was present, so were his hands, but his dagger would never leave his hands that easily. He looked at the footprints on the ground and smiled coldly. The footprints were very deep. Fu Hongxue had left them behind. When he had walked out of this door, he had already concentrated the force of his entire body, because only by concentrating all of the force of his body could he defend against Xiao Suwu's dagger. But Xiao Suwu's dagger did not leave his hand. Fu Hongxue walked outside. Raising his head towards the sky, he let out a long sigh. It seemed as though he felt disappointed. Not only was he disappointed, he was worried. He suddenly realized that youngster was more terrifying than any of the people he had met over the past few years. He had already seen through the dagger style of the youngster, and wanted to provoke him into striking. If the youngster were to strike now, Fu Hongxue would be able to handle it. He was certain of it. Unexpectedly, this youngster was even colder and more fearful than the dagger in his hands. 3 years later, if he throws his dagger at me, will I still be able to handle it? The neighing of horses could be heard in front of him. The courtyard was still very peaceful and secluded. Fu Hongxue was gripped by a sudden impulse to go back and kill that youngster, but he did not turn back. He slowly walked out of the courtyard. Gong Suntu and Yan Nanfei were walking in front of him. The rose sword was still resting on his throat. Yan Nanfei was facing Gong Suntu, and slowly walking backwards step by step. Gong Suntu was unwilling to face him. He had already closed his eyes. It was as though Yan Nanfei was using a bamboo cane to beat a blind man. But this blind man really was too dangerous. He couldn't slacken off in the slightest. Minai Uxin was the last to leave the guest room. She was just about to hasten her steps and catch up to Fu Hongxue. At this moment, Yang Wuji appeared by her side. He said, "Do you know what is behind that wall?" Minai Uxin shook her head. Yang Wuji grinned at her. "You'll find out soon." Watching him smile, Minai Uxin's hands were covered with cold sweat. Yang Wuji took 2 steps back. Smiling, he nodded. Just at this moment, 9 people appeared from behind the short wall. The 9 of them wielded 13 different hidden projectiles. Each type contained at least 3 projectiles. The sound of bowstrings and springs being released sounded together in unison, as 30 flashing points of light streaked towards her like raindrops in a torrential storm. Minai Uxin's reaction speed wasn't slow. As soon as the sounds were heard, she immediately used her skills to try and dodge. A flash of saber light flew towards her, sweeping away most of the projectiles. For her, she had already moved her body, retreating to the left. None of the remaining projectiles were able to land on her. Just as she was about to let out a sigh of relief, a sword suddenly pierced into the left side of her chest. She barely felt the pain at all. The edge of the sword was cold and sharp. She only felt a sudden chill, and saw that a strange expression had appeared on Fu Hongxue's pale face. He suddenly stretched out his hand and pulled her towards him. And then, she fell into Fu Hongxue's bosom. Yang Wuji used an ancient, soft-lined sword. His sword had left the scabbard, and was still dripping with fresh blood. As he stared at the fresh blood on his sword, his face suddenly became totally emotionless. His attack was sure to land. He had calculated from the very beginning that Fu Hongxue would pull out his saber, and had calculated where THxChemSci would dodge to. His sword was there, waiting for her. Everything which had happened was within his calculations. He had already calculated that this attack of his was sure to land. The 9 men had disappeared. Fu Hongxue did not pursue them. He only coldly stared at Yang Wuji. Yan Nanfei also came to a stop. The hand he was wielding his sword with seemed to tremble. Yang Wuji suddenly said, "You had best be careful not to hurt him. If he dies, so does the Oyazin." Yan Nanfei gritted his teeth. "You are a famous swordsman with a lofty reputation, and this is your very own monastery. Yet you would actually use this sort of despicable method to plot against a lady? What type of creature are you?" Yang Wuji lightly said, "I am Yang Wuji, and I am going to kill her." From far away, the man in black was standing in the middle of the guest room's doorway. He sighed. If he intends to kill someone, he abstains from nothing at all. Yang Wuji really is Yang Wuji. Yang Wuji said, "If I don't kill her right now, I'll have missed a golden opportunity. In the future, I'm afraid I won't have a second chance." Fu Hongxue stared at him. With one hand, he clenched his saber. With the other, he held the fainted THxChemSci to him. He could feel that THxChemSci's body was slowly growing cold. Yang Wuji said, "Do you intend to take revenge for her?" Fu Hongxue didn't say another word. He was already beginning to walk backwards. Yan Nanfei looked at THxChemSci, held in Fu Hongxue's embrace. Then he looked at Gongsun, who was still pinned by his sword. Gongsun's eyes were still closed. His scarred face looked like a mask. Yan Nanfei suddenly began to walk backwards as well. Yang Wuji wasn't surprised at all. He lightly said, "The carriage has been prepared. Zhao Yazan is waiting for you in the carriage. I wish you a pleasant trip." Yan Nanfei couldn't resist saying, "Aren't you afraid that I'm going to kill Gongsun after I get on the carriage?" Yang Wuji said, "Why should I be afraid? What does his life and death have to do with me?" He suddenly turned around and went back to the guest room. Arriving at the doorway, he tugged on the man in black's sleeves. "Let's go play some chess." The man in black immediately nodded. Smiling, he said, "My purpose in coming was to play chess, after all." 3. The horse carriage really had been prepared. A young maiden, 6 months pregnant or so, was sitting in a corner of the carriage, crying. Fu Hongxue brought THxChemSci into the carriage, but the rose sword remained on Gongsun's throat. Yan Nanfei said in a ferocious voice, "Open your eyes and look at me." Gongsun immediately opened his eyes. Yan Nanfei glared at him with hate-filled eyes. "I really wanted to kill you," Gongsun said, "but you won't, because you are Yan Nanfei, whose word is as good as gold." Yan Nanfei glared hatefully at him for a long time. Suddenly, he kicked Gongsun in the stomach. Gongsun's body immediately crumpled inwards, as though he were a shrimp. Tears, snivel, and cold sweat began to flow. Yan Nanfei didn't even spare him a single glance. Turning around, he said to the carriage driver, "Whip the horse and go. Don't stop for even a moment. If you want to try any tricks, do remember that my sword is at your back." The carriage was very large, and the seats were very soft. The carriage driver was very skilled. This was a carriage which people should be very happy to ride in. But there wasn't a single happy person in the carriage. Fu Hongxue suddenly said, "I should have killed Xiao Suwu." Yan Nanfei said, "You didn't move against him." Fu Hongxue said, "Because I had some misgivings, therefore a broken bar." Yan Nanfei said, "Therefore, you were too slow." Fu Hongxue slowly nodded. "If you intend to kill someone, abstain from nothing at all. When a golden opportunity is missed, it won't come again." He spoke very slowly, as though he had already carefully pondered every single word. Yan Nanfei was silent for a long time, before he let out a sigh. I'm afraid I won't have many more chances to kill Gongsun either, Fu Hongxue said. Fortunately, Minai Uxin is not dead yet. Miss Zhao is also safe and sound. Zhao Yazun, who was seated in a corner, was no longer crying. She looked at him, then suddenly said, "You are Fu Hongxue?" Fu Hongxue nodded. Zhao Yazun said, "I've never met you, but I often heard Kiyu, a broken bar big brother, could talk about you. He often said that you were the only friend who could be trusted." He also said a broken bar. Fu Hongxue asked, "Said what?" Downcast, she said. "He told me time and time again that if something happened to me where he wasn't able to help me out, I was to seek you out. That's why he carefully described you to me and had me memorize your features." She lowered her head, tears falling. She said, "I never imagined that I would still be alive, but he would read your broken bar." At this point, her sobs overwhelmed her voice. Bowing down in her seat, she began to bawl loudly. She was a beautiful girl. Her beauty was of a delicate and weak type, which easily lent itself to making others empathize with her. Although Minai Uxin was smart and tough, if it weren't for the fact that Fu Hongxue had staunched the flow of blood in time, she would have died by now. Gazing at them, Yan Nanfei couldn't help but let out a light sigh. "No matter what, at least we have now done right by Mani Master Ku," Fu Hongxue said. "We have not done right by him." Yan Nanfei was very astonished. "We haven't." Fu Hongxue's dagger-like gaze was focused on the girl beside him. He coldly said, "This girl is not Zhao Yazun." "She definitely is not,"